Exiled with his pregnant wife, Chang Woo awakened a brutal survival system. It carried a dead forester's lifetime of winter knowledge. The elders had condemned Han Mae and little Yuri. Their crime was suggesting smoked meat after losing salt. Every tree, track, flame, and frozen stream became useful. The forest rewarded his respect with growth and doubled resources. That first night, his family ate safely beside fire. Their exile became the first foundation of Cedar Court. The cold hits his lungs like a fist. Chang Woo opens his eyes and sees a strange gray sky filled with snow. His fingers are clenched around the axe handle until his knuckles turn white. He doesn't remember this axe. He doesn't remember anything at all from those last few seconds. Only ice, only black water, only the shriek of a drowning puppy, and then silence, and now the sky. He sits up and doesn't recognize his own body. His hands are thin, sinewy, and dark, covered in old calluses. His heart is pounding in his temples. He struggles to stand and nearly falls. His legs are shorter. His center of gravity is unfamiliar. And then memory crashes down like an avalanche. Not his memory, someone else's. 31 years of a stranger's life pour into his head in a single stream. Lee Chang Woo, the youngest woodcutter of the Lee clan, a wife, a 4-year-old daughter, and a child in the 7th month, banished this morning for daring to suggest smoking meat instead of salting it when the clan sold all their salt to the Duke to pay off debts. The elder called him a rebel. The council voted unanimously. His family was thrown out along with him into the winter forest. Chang Woo turns his head. 10 paces away, a sled with a cracked runner. A woman sits on the sled. A gaunt face, dark circles, a belly under her sheepskin coat. She holds a little girl with frostbitten red cheeks close to her. The girl isn't crying. She's just staring into space. That's how children look who are already tired of being afraid. This is his family. No, not his. His family remained in another world. His wife Lena. The apartment in Arkhangelsk. The old UAZ. The like-a-named Barry. All of that was and is gone. Ivan Sokolov drowned under the ice of the old river in February. And Lee Chang Woo received his memory and his body as a bonus to his own death. The wind cuts into his face. 25 below. Maybe 30. He knows this cold. He grew up in this kind of cold. Only before he had a home and a stove and enough firewood to last 3 months. And now a sled. A pregnant woman, a 4-year-old girl, and the black taiga stretching from horizon to horizon. Vast, silent, indifferent. Chang Woo looks at the fir trees, looks at the axe, looks at his new hands and laughs quietly, almost silently, so as not to wake the girl. The forest again, as if someone up above decided to play a joke or give a second chance. The woman on the sled stares at him in horror. She thinks her husband has gone mad from the cold. Her name is Han Mae, 27 years old. She has spent her entire life within the clan's walls. She stepped outside them for the first time and straight into the grave, or so she thinks. Chang Woo stops laughing. He stands up. He brushes the snow off his knees. He adjusts the axe at his belt. He walks over to the sled. Han Mae recoils. He notices this and takes it to heart. The old Chang Woo couldn't even nail a plank down for 3 years. Of course, she's afraid. Not of him. She's afraid he won't be able to handle it. That they'll all die here. He crouches down in front of the sled. He stares deep into her eyes. He speaks calmly that there's no need to be afraid, that by evening they'll have a roof over their heads and something hot to eat. She doesn't believe him. He sees it, but he nods because there's no choice. Chang Woo straightens up and gets to work. First, he reads the forest, not like a lumberjack who sees only trunks for sale, but like Ivan Sokolov, foreman of the logging cooperative, a 4th-generation hereditary forester. There's a spruce with thick branches. It'll lie flat like roof tiles. A nearby mound held loam that could be warmed, kneaded into paste, and pressed into every crack of the shelter. There's a dead birch that's been standing for 3 years. The bark peels off in sheets. The best kindling. There's an uprooted tree. The roots have already formed a wall, built up on 3 sides, and the frame is ready. He's chopping. The axe is excellent, an old northern forging, heavy and well-balanced. The only valuable thing the former owner took with him when he left the clan. In 2 hours, Chang Woo cuts down poles and chops brushwood. In the 3rd, he assembles the frame by the uprooted tree in a Venki chum. He's seen ones like this on the Pokora. A cone made of poles, pine branches in layers from bottom to top. Snow on top is insulation. The entrance is on the leeward side. Inside, a stone hearth with a chimney. He molds the chimney out of loam on a frame of twigs. It's crooked, rough, but the draft works right away. Han Mae sits on the sled and watches. Yuri sleeps in his sheepskin coat. The wind picks up, the frost bites. Chang Woo works quickly. The body is unfamiliar, but the hands remember the essentials. The angle of the poles, the direction of the grain, where to strike so the log splits cleanly. It's in the muscles. Ivan has been doing this since he was 14. The fire blazes up. It's 10 degrees above freezing inside. He carries Yuri in first. The girl wakes up. She stares at the fire. She looks at her father and clings to his shirt with both hands. She doesn't let go until she falls asleep again. He lays her down on the pine branches and covers her with a sheepskin coat. Then he helps Han Mae. She walks with difficulty. Her belly gets in the way. He offers his hand. She takes it. Her palm is icy. Inside the yurt, Han Mae stands frozen by the fire. She looks at the flames, at the walls of pine branches, at the chimney that's working, at her husband who an hour ago was laughing like a madman in a snowdrift, and then in 3 hours built a warm home out of nothing. She is silent, but her hands stop trembling. Chang Woo goes outside. It's getting dark. He needs meat. He pulls a coil of twine from the sled, thin but strong, enough for 3 snares. He knows where to set them. The hare's tracks stand out in the snow like writing, fresh, frequent tracks from the edge of the forest to the spruce grove. This is a feeding ground. He sets snares on 3 trails, 12 centimeters off the ground. A stake with a trigger made from a stick. The hare will tug and pull it shut itself. On the way back, he freezes. The forest is dark and quiet. The fir trees stand like walls. The snow is smooth, nothing out of the ordinary. But something is changing, as if someone huge and invisible is turning their head and looking at him. Not hostile, not friendly, just looking. Like a homeowner looks at a stranger who walked in without knocking, Chang Woo stands and listens. The wind, the creaking of tree trunks, the rustling of snow from the branches, and beneath all that, something else. Not a sound, a sensation. The forest sees him. He doesn't know what that means, and he doesn't try to figure it out. Now is not the time for mysteries. Now he needs meat and sleep. He returns to the yurt. He tosses some firewood on the fire. Han Mae is sleeping sitting up. Yuri's breathing is steady. No coughing. He sits down by the entrance and waits. 2 hours later, he checks the snares. The first one is empty. The second one is empty. A hare sits in the third, a big one, fat for winter. Chang Woo takes it down quickly, cuts it on a stump by the moonlight. His hands remember every movement. The knife along the belly. Skin it with a stocking. Don't tear it. Heart and liver for food. Nothing will go to waste. He returns and prepares the meal. He finds under the snow wild lingonberries, sour, perfect. He stuffs the hare with the berries, places it on a birch skewer over the coals. That drips onto the stones. The scent wafts through the chum. Han Mae wakes up from the smell. She looks at the meat, then at her husband, then back at the meat, and she cries silently. Tears just flow. Not from fear, not from grief, from the fact that this man, who for 3 years couldn't even nail a plank in place, built a warm house in a single night and hunted meat in the winter forest with his bare hands. Chang Woo cuts off a piece and hands it to her. He tells her to eat slowly. Her stomach isn't used to hot food anymore. Yuri wakes up. She sniffs. He gives her a piece. The girl chews earnestly like a little animal. Then she looks at her father and says it's delicious. One word, the first in 3 days. Chang Woo smiles. He strokes her matted, dirty hair. Tomorrow he'll heat some water and wash her. The day after tomorrow he'll put up a proper shelter. In a week he'll find a place for a winter camp. He knows what to do. 20 years in the taiga have taught him one thing. Winter doesn't kill those who prepare. Winter kills those who wait. He isn't going to wait. Outside the walls of the yurt, the wind howls, the frost bites. The black taiga stands like a wall from horizon to horizon, and somewhere deep in the forest something stirs. Not a beast, not a man. Something ancient and patient. It has waited 300 years, and now it senses that the wait is coming to an end. The morning began with silence, so thick that Chang Woo woke from it as if from a scream. The wind had died down overnight. The snow had stopped falling. The taiga stood motionless. The fire in the hearth had burned down to embers, but the heat still lingered. Han Mae was sleeping on her side. Yuri was curled up by her side. Their breathing was steady, and no coughing. Chang Woo made his way outside. The frost stung his face, 30 below, maybe colder. He could feel it in his skin. His cheeks went numb in an instant, but the sky was clear for the first time in 3 days, blue, low. The sun hung over their fir trees like a yellow lantern. He looked around. In the light, the forest looked different. Last night he had set up camp at random. He'd chosen the spot based on the memories of the former Chang Woo. But the former Chang Woo was a woodcutter, not a hunter. He saw the forest as a workplace. Ivan Sokolov saw the forest as home. And now, in the light of day, Ivan inside, Chang Woo began to read the taiga. Over there to the northeast, the spruce forest leads into a ravine. A ravine means a stream. The stream is under the ice, but if it flows year-round, that means there's groundwater nearby. Over there to the south stand 3 old cedars, tall, thick. They're about 200 years old. Cedars of that age only grow in good soil. That means the ground beneath the snow is fertile. A broad western clearing could become a garden after the fallen trunks were removed. It'll be big enough for a vegetable garden. He headed northeast toward the log. His feet sank knee-deep into the snow. His body was thin and light. The former Chang Woo hadn't eaten enough for years. His muscles were weak. He had no stamina, but that was fine. The body was a work in progress. After a month of normal food and work, it would get into shape. The ravine turned out to be exactly what he'd expected, a shallow gully. At the bottom, a stream beneath the ice, but the ice was thin. Water was flowing. He broke a hole with the handle of his axe. Water came pouring out, clean, cold, delicious. He filled the pot he'd found in the sled and moved on along the stream to the east, and after walking for half an hour he saw it. A winter hut, old, very old. A log cabin made of darkened logs. The roof had sagged on one side. The door hung on a single hinge. The walls were overgrown with moss, but the log cabin still stood, and most importantly, a corner of stonework jutted out. From under the snow, a stove, a real stone stove. Chang Woo approached. He touched the wall. The logs were damp, but not rotten. Larch, of course. Larch doesn't rot for decades. Whoever built this winter shelter knew what they were doing. Chang Woo walked around it. 3 walls were intact. The 4th had collapsed inward. The stove was still standing. The chimney was destroyed, but the firebox was intact. The floor was earthen. The ceiling beams had sagged but hadn't broken. He stood by the winter shelter for about 10 minutes just looking and calculating how much wood would be needed for repairs. How many days of work? What tools were available and which were missing? Then he touched the wall with his hand and the world shook. Not really. The walls didn't sway. The ground didn't give way beneath his feet, but something happened inside. As if his hand had touched a hot stove. It didn't burn him. It warmed him, and an image flashed in his mind. A brief, vivid one. A woman, tall with long black hair, standing by that very wall, smiling. She's wearing a fur sleeveless jacket and a heavy leather belt with a knife. Behind her is the forest, green summery, alive, and the forest looks at her just as it looked at Chang Woo last night. The image faded. Chang Woo withdrew his hand. His fingers were trembling, not from the cold. Someone had lived here a long time ago. Maybe 10 years ago. Maybe 100, and that someone was connected to the forest, just as he himself was beginning to be connected. He didn't know who she was. He didn't know what had happened. But he knew one thing. This winter hut was waiting for him. He returned to the yurt 2 hours later. Han Mae was no longer asleep. She was sitting at the entrance feeding Yuri the remains of a hare. Seeing her husband, she stood up. There was a question in her eyes. Chang Woo said he had found a house, old but sturdy, with a stove, half an hour's walk to the east. They needed to move there today. Han Mae looked at him, then at Yuri, then back at him. She asked how he knew the house was sturdy. Before, he couldn't tell a living tree from a dead one. Chang Woo paused. Then he said that exile changes people. It was true, but not the whole truth. Han Mae didn't ask any further. She gathered their belongings. He harnessed the sled. Yuri sat on the sheepskin coat. Han Mae was beside him. He pulled the sled himself. The runners creaked. The snow was deep, but the path down to the stream sloped downward, and the sled glided easily. An hour later, they were standing by the winter hut. Han Mae looked at the crooked log cabin, at the collapsed roof, at the door hanging on a single hinge. Her expression was such that Chang Woo understood. She didn't see a house. She saw a grave. He said nothing. He simply set to work. First, he cleared the snow from the walls. Then he lifted the fallen logs of the 4th wall. 2 were intact. 1 was cracked. He replaced it with a fresh log. It took a long time to chop. His body was tiring faster than he was used to, but the axe was good, and large split cleanly beneath a properly angled strike. By noon, the wall stood complete, with thick moss packed into every gap. The moss grew thick here, lush, green even in winter. Then the roof. He removed the sagging rafters. He put in new ones. He covered them with spruce branches, 3 layers, then 1 more just to be sure. Then the stove. He dismantled what was left of the chimney, rebuilt it from stones using clay mortar. He dug up the clay right there by the stream, mixed it with water in a pot. He worked with his hands because he didn't have a trowel. By evening, the chimney was standing, crooked, but the draft was working. He lit the fire. The stove stones heated up slowly, old, heavy. They held the heat for hours. 2 hours later, it was 15 degrees inside. Han Mae stood in the middle of the winter hut, 1 room, 4 steps long, 3 wide, dirt floor, walls of black larch logs, low ceiling, a small window covered with a bull's bladder. No, not a bull's, something else. Chang Woo looked more closely. The membrane was thin, transparent. He didn't know what it was made of, but it let light through. Han Mae turned to him. Her eyes were shining. She said it was warm, just that, warm. As if that single word carried more weight than all the others. Chang Woo nodded. Then he went out and set traps until nightfall. 6 of them, 3 for hares, 3 for something bigger. A squirrel would do, too. Han Mae could sew the skins. When he returned, Yuri was sitting on the floor, running her palms over the warm stones of the stove. Her face was serious and focused. She was warming her hands. Her frostbitten cheeks began to turn pink. It was the first morning of their new life. Then came the second day, and the third, and every day, Chang Woo worked from dawn to dusk. On the 4th day, he began his rounds. He got up before dawn. He took an axe, and he went around. He didn't know why. Something inside told him. He had to, as if the forest were prompting him. He walked through the snow. He marked the trees with notches. 8 ancient trees in a circle, each too thick for one person to wrap both arms around. He touched every trunk, placed his palm on the bark, and every tree responded with warmth, not physical, internal. When the circle closed, something changed. Not on the outside, on the inside, as if a lock had clicked, as if someone big and old had nodded. The forest accepted him, or he accepted the forest. It made no difference. On the 3rd day after his patrol, a moose emerged near the nearest snare, huge, old, with 1 broken antler. It didn't get caught in the snare. It just stood there looking at Chang Woo. He looked back at it. Then the moose turned and walked away, slowly, as if inviting him. Chang Woo followed him. The moose led him to a fallen spruce tree. Beneath the tree, in the snow, lay a deer carcass, fresh. Wolves had killed it during the night, but for some reason had abandoned it. 3/4 of the meat was intact. Chang Woo stood and looked at the carcass. Then he looked at the forest around him. The forest had doubled his reward. He caught a hare. The forest had brought him a deer. He butchered the carcass right there. He worked for 2 hours. He placed the meat on stretcher made of poles and a deer hide. He dragged it to the winter shelter. When Han Mae saw how much meat he'd brought, she sat down on the bench and was silent for a long time. Then she asked how. Chang Woo replied that he'd been lucky. Han Mae looked him in the eyes. She didn't believe him. But the meat was real. It would last a month, if smoked properly, and Chang Woo knew how to smoke it properly. He had already built a smokehouse. The smokehouse was simple. A pit in the ground waist deep. The walls lined with stone. On top, a grate made of raw birch twigs. Above the grate, a shelter made of spruce branches to trap the smoke. Alder wood chips for smoking. Chang Woo found alder on the bank of the stream, 3 trees, thin and straight. He chopped the wood chips in an hour. He cut the venison into long strips along the grain, rubbed it with ash. There was plenty of ash from the stove. In his past life, he would have rubbed it with salt, but there was no salt. The ash worked less effectively, but it worked. It drew out moisture and killed bacteria. He hung the strips on the grate. He lit the alderwood chips. Thick smoke billowed out, white with the right smell. Han Mae stood nearby and watched. She had never seen meat being smoked. In the Lee clan, they salted everything. Salt was cheap. It was until the clan sold their entire supply to Duke Cho to pay off debts. It was precisely for this idea, smoking instead of salting, that Chang Woo was exiled. Irony. Now he smoked meat in the forest and no one could stop him. The first batch was ready in 3 days. Dark, dry strips, firm to the touch, smelling of smoke and alder. Chang Woo cut off a piece. He tasted it. A bit tough. Without salt, the taste was bland. But this was meat that could be stored for months in the cold. Han Mae tasted it. Yuri tasted it. Yuri chewed long and carefully. Then she nodded. She approved. For the next 3 weeks, Chang Woo worked nonstop. He turned the winter shelter into a home. He built benches. He built a table. He found a stash in an old hiding place under the floor of the winter shelter. Someone had left things here. A long time ago. Maybe 10 years ago. Maybe longer. A coil of wire to knives. A hunting knife and a carving knife. Both rusty, but well forged. A spool of coarse thread. 3 clay pots, 2 intact, 1 with a crack. A piece of wax, a small bag of seeds. He didn't know whose things they were. But he remembered the woman from the vision. Tall, with long hair. This was her home, her hideout, Her life, he felt gratitude. Whoever she was, she had left him an inheritance. The wire changed everything. With the wire, he could set real snares. Not the string ones that broke every other time, but steel ones. Hair after hair, squirrel after squirrel, the meat went to the smokehouse. The skins went to Han Mae. She turned out to be a skilled seamstress. Her hands remembered, her back ached from the work. But she didn't complain. By the end of the first month, they had warm mittens made of rabbit fur, hats, a sleeveless jacket for Yuri. Yuri didn't take off the sleeveless jacket even when she slept. She stroked the fur and smiled. Her cough was completely gone. Her cheeks turned pink. She started talking, a lot, constantly, as if a dam had burst. She told her mother what Dad was doing. Dad is chopping wood. Dad is putting up a fence. Dad is cooking something in a pot. Dad touches the trees and talks to the forest. Chang Woo heard the last part by accident. Yuri said it in a whisper, like a secret. Han Mae listened and didn't interrupt. Chang Woo began building a stockade. Sharp stakes around the winter hut, not from people, from animals. Bears sleep in winter, but wolverines don't. Wolves don't sleep. Lynxes don't sleep. A palisade won't stop a bear, but it will stop everything else. He drove stakes into the frozen ground. His hands were covered in calluses upon calluses. His back ached every evening, but the palisade grew. 20 stakes, 30, 50, a double-leaf gate on rope hinges, simple, but sturdy. When the last stake was in place, Chang Woo stepped back 10 paces and looked. The winter shelter, the smokehouse, the stockade, the gate, a wood pile against the wall as tall as a man, smoke from the chimney. It already looked like a yard, small, bare, but a yard. Han Mae came out to him. She stood beside him. She was silent. Then she said quietly that she had never thought they would have a yard of their own. In the clan, they had lived in a communal house. One room for people. The walls were thin, strangers' voices on both sides. It was quiet here. It was just the two of them here. Chang Woo looked at her, at her belly. Soon, in 2 months, he needed to get everything ready before the birth. Warm water, clean rags, a knife, thread. A place, in his past life, Ivan Sokolov had delivered to babies. Once for a cow. Once for a neighbor's wife who'd been caught in a blizzard on the highway. Both times everything went smoothly. But that was a past life with a hospital 30 kilometers away. There was no hospital here. There was nothing here but his hands and his knowledge. That would have to be enough. He began to make things. Not for survival, for life. The first thing was a shelf. The very one that the old Chang Woo hadn't been able to nail up for 3 years. He cut a plank from a dry spruce tree. He trimmed it. He smoothed it out. He nailed it to the wall using wooden wedges. Han Mae placed pots on it. She stepped back. She looked. She said nothing. But Chang Woo saw her lips tremble. Then he made a bed, not a real one. A wooden platform on legs. Pine branches on top. Skins over the branches, deer, hair, rough but soft. The first night on the bed, Han Mae slept for 10 hours without waking. She hadn't slept that long since she'd become pregnant. Then he made a small bed for Yuri out of linden wood. He carved an owl on the headboard, rough, angular, but recognizable. Yuri saw the owl. She touched it with her finger. She asked why. Chang Woo replied that the owl would keep watch while Yuri slept. Yuri nodded seriously. She lay down, pulled the blanket made of hare skins over herself, and told the owl it could start keeping watch. That night, Chang Woo lay there listening to the silence. Han Mae breathed evenly. Yuri snored. The stove crackled. Outside the walls, the frost pressed against them. The forest stood around the stockade, dark and vast. And Chang Woo thought that a home is not walls or a roof. A home is when everyone sleeps peacefully and no one fears tomorrow. There it was, the beginning cedar court. He didn't yet know he would call it that, but the name was already hanging in the air like smoke and stove warmth. On the 40th day, he found 3 young cedars beside the southern stream. 3 young trees. They grew by a stream on the southern slope, small, waist-high, bent by the wind, but alive. Chang Woo knelt down and touched the nearest one. The bark was thin and warm. The tree hummed beneath his fingers. He carefully dug up all 3. He carried them to the winter hut, planted them by the entrance, watered them with water from the stream, and told them to grow, not out loud to himself, but the forest heard. A week later, the sprouts straightened up. 2 weeks later, they had grown a hand's width taller. Han Mae noticed. She asked how that was possible in winter. Chang Woo shrugged. He said that cedars are strong trees. Han Mae looked at him with a long gaze. She was beginning to understand that her husband had changed, that something had happened to him, something more than exile. The second month began with a storm. For 3 days, the wind snapped trees. Snow fell in sheets. The temperature dropped to -40. Chang Woo didn't leave the house. He stoked the stove. He kept an eye on the chimney. He added firewood every 2 hours. Han Mae sewed. Yuri slept. They sat in the warmth while outside the walls. The world tried to kill them. On the 4th day, the storm ended. Chang Woo went out. The snow was waist deep. The stockade had held. So had the smokehouse. The sled was buried. A single fir tree by the stream had fallen and blocked the path. He cleared a passage in 2 hours. He checked the snares. 3 were empty. 2 had been torn off by an animal. 1 had a hair. Not much. The storm had scared the game away, but he still had a supply of smoked meat. It would last another 3 weeks. Chang Woo knew that after a storm, the forest comes alive. Hungry animals emerge from their hiding places. They start looking for food. Now he had to wait. On the 2nd day after the storm, he was checking the distant traps when he heard a sound. Distant, low. A wolf's howl. Not a hunting howl, a mournful one. A lone wolf. Chang Woo stopped. He listened. The howl came from the northwest, far away, about 3 kilometers. He didn't go there. It wasn't his business. Wolves live their own lives. He lives his, but the forest had other ideas. The next morning, at the gate of the stockade, he found tracks. Wolf tracks. Large ones. The beast had approached the gate, stood there, then left. Didn't try to get in. Didn't scratch with its claws. Just stood there and left. Strange. Chang Woo crouched over the tracks, touched the snow. And that feeling again. The forest had shown him. Not a picture, not words, just knowledge. The wolf was wounded. An old male, cast out of the pack, with a torn paw. He came to the stockade because he sensed smoke and food. And he left because he was afraid. Chang Woo stood up straight. He took a piece of meat from the smokehouse. He placed it by the gate. He went back inside. By morning, the meat had been eaten. The tracks led back north. The next day, Chang Woo placed another piece closer to the gate. The meat was gone again. On the 3rd day, he placed the meat inside the gate. He left the gate ajar. In the morning, the meat had been eaten. The tracks led back outside. On the 4th day, he didn't put out any meat. He simply left the gate ajar. In the morning, the tracks were inside. The wolf had come. It lay down by the wall of the smokehouse, warm from the heat. He slept and left before dawn. On the 5th day, Yuri woke up before her father. She ran outside and saw the wolf. He was lying by the wall of the smokehouse, gray old, with a torn ear and a scar across its muzzle. Its front paw was swollen and hung unnaturally. Yuri froze. The wolf raised its head, looked at her. Yuri looked at the wolf. Then she turned and quietly walked back into the house. She woke up Chang Woo. Told him there was a dog out there. A big gray dog. Chang Woo went out. The wolf was lying down, not moving, not growling. Just lying there and watching. Yellow eyes, calm. Chang Woo crouched down 5 steps away from him. The wolf didn't move. The forest gift of animal respect had worked. Wild animals weren't afraid of him and didn't attack. This wolf hadn't come for meat. It had come because it sensed that it was safe here. Chang Woo approached slowly. He held out his hand. The wolf sniffed it. It didn't bite. Chang Woo examined the paw. A fracture, not fresh, about 10 days. The bone had started to heal crookedly. If left as is, the wolf would remain lame forever. In his past life, Ivan Sokolov had set dog's paws on the worksite. Roughly, without anesthesia, the dog howled, the forester cursed, but the paws healed straight. He looked the wolf in the eyes. He said it would hurt. The wolf didn't understand the words, but it understood something. It lay down more still, stretched out its paw. Chang Woo took hold with both hands. In one motion, he broke the crookedly fused bone. The wolf flinched, bared its teeth, but didn't bite. Chang Woo quickly straightened the bone. He applied a splint made of 2 straight sticks. He wrapped it with a strip of leather, tightly, securely done. The wolf lay there, breathing heavily. Yuri approached. She crouched down beside him. She stroked the wolf's head. The wolf closed its eyes. Han Mae stood in the doorway, pale, her hands pressed against her stomach. She saw the wild wolf lying at the feet of a 4-year-old girl and her husband who had just set its bone with his bare hands. She wanted to scream. She wanted to grab her daughter and drag into the house. But she didn't scream because the wolf lay still and Yuri was smiling. The first broad smile since the expulsion. The wolf stayed. Chang Woo named him Gray. Yuri named him Good. Han Mae didn't call him anything. She gave him a wide berth for the first week. Then out of habit, then she got used to it. Gray lay by the stove and kept warm. He ate whatever they gave him. He went outside on his own and came back. After 3 weeks, the splint came off. The paw had healed. The wolf stopped limping. But he didn't leave. He stayed at Cedar Court, the first non-human resident. At night, Chang Woo heard Gray walking along the stockade, patrolling, guarding. No one had taught him. He decided on his own, and Chang Woo lay there on those nights and made plans. Han Mae's belly was growing. The time was approaching, 2 months, maybe a month and a half. He needed to prepare. He began gathering what he would need: clean rags. He gathered some moss, dried it on the stove. Moss absorbs better than any fabric. A knife. He sharpened his hunting knife until it was razor sharp. Thread, coarse but strong. He boiled it in a pot, warm water. He set up a system. The pot on the stove, water from the stream, boil it. Cool it to a bearable temperature, quickly, simply. He was preparing as if for surgery, because giving birth in the forest without a doctor is, in fact, surgery. Han Mae watched him prepare. She said nothing. One night, while Yuri was asleep, she quietly asked what would happen if something went wrong. Chang Woo paused. Then he said that everything would go as planned. Han Mae shook her head. She said he couldn't know that. Chang Woo agreed. He said he couldn't, but he would do everything in his power, and his strength would be enough. Han Mae looked at him for a long time, then she moved closer. She rested her head on his shoulder. For the first time since the exile, she didn't say she believed him, but her head on his shoulder spoke louder than any words. That night, Chang Woo didn't sleep. He sat by the stove with his wife's head on his shoulder and thought. He thought about how in his past life he had been a good forester, but a bad husband. He worked 12-hour shifts. He came home in the evening without a word. He ate in silence. He went to bed in silence. Lena put up with it. Lena always put up with it. He never told her he loved her. He didn't get the chance. He fell through the ice and didn't have time. Here, he wouldn't repeat that mistake. Han Mae was breathing quietly. Her hand rested on her stomach. The baby was kicking. Chang Woo felt the kicks through her body. Small, stubborn, lively. He placed his palm on her stomach. The baby kicked right into his hand, hard. Chang Woo smiled. A fighter. Outside, Gray was circling the palisade. His claws scraped against the packed snow. The cedars at the entrance stood straight, already chest high despite the winter. In winter, impossible, but they were growing. The forest gave them strength. The forest gave strength to everything within the circle. And Chang Woo understood that this didn't come for free. Something awaited him ahead, something big. But right now, he was concerned with only one thing. That in a month and a half a cry would ring out in this house, loud, angry, alive. The cry of a new person. Labor began at night, as always. Han Mae woke up in pain. She groaned softly. Chang Woo woke up instantly. He had been sleeping lightly for the past 2 weeks, waiting for that sound. He got up. He tossed some firewood into the stove. He placed a pot of water on the stones. He lit all the pine torches, 4 of them. The room filled with a warm, flickering light. Han Mae sat on the bed. Her face was wet with sweat. Her hands were clutching the blanket. The contractions were coming every 10 minutes. It was early. Hours lay ahead. Chang Woo sat down beside her. He took her hand. He told her everything was going well. Han Mae nodded. Her teeth were clenched. Her eyes were closed. Yuri woke up from the noise. She saw her mother. She was scared. Chang Woo picked her up. He held her close to his face. He whispered that Mom was okay. That Yuri would soon have a little brother or sister, that she needed to be quiet and brave. Yuri nodded seriously, like a grown-up. Chang Woo wrapped her in a fur coat and carried her out onto the porch. Gray was lying by the door. Chang Woo sat Yuri down next to the wolf. He told Gray to keep watch. The wolf rested his head on his paws and closed his eyes. Yuri pressed herself against his warm side. She wasn't afraid. She had long since stopped being afraid of Gray. Chang Woo went back inside. Han Mae was breathing heavily. The contractions were coming closer together. 8 minutes. 7. He boiled some water. He washed his hands. He laid out everything he needed. Clean moss, a knife, thread, strips of cloth, a pot of warm water. He knew what to do. He remembered every step. He remembered how Lena had given birth in a neighbor's car. He remembered the midwife's voice on the phone, steady and calm. Do this, then that. Don't rush. He'd manage then. He managed now. The hours dragged on. Han Mae groaned through clenched teeth. She didn't scream. She didn't know how to scream. Clan women don't scream during childbirth. It's a disgrace, barbaric. Chang Woo told her it was okay to scream, that there were no elders here and no rules, that she could scream, yell and curse as much as she wanted. Han Mae looked at him. She didn't understand, but during the next contraction, she screamed loudly, angrily, and it became easier. Chang Woo could see it on her face. The tension eased slightly. Her body stopped fighting the pain and began to work with it. He placed warm cloths under her back. He gave her water. He held her hand when she asked. He stepped away when he needed to check on the progress. By dawn, the interval between contractions had shortened to a minute. Han Mae lay there, wet and pale. Her hair was plastered to her forehead, but her eyes were open, alive, angry. Chang Woo said it was coming soon. Han Mae nodded. She braced herself. She squeezed his hand so hard her knuckles cracked, and she began to push. Ivan Sokolov had delivered to babies before. Both times he was afraid. Both times his hands trembled. Now his hands weren't trembling. Maybe because this was already the third body. Maybe because the forest stood all around and held him with its calm. He didn't know. He just did what needed to be done. The baby was coming out right. Head first, no entanglement, no complications. Chang Woo guided, supported. And when the tiny body slipped into his hands, the world stopped for a second. Silence. Then a cry, loud, angry, alive. A boy, red and wrinkled with black hair, with fists clenched so tightly as if he were already ready to fight. Chang Woo cut the umbilical cord, tied it off with a thread, wiped the baby down with warm water, wrapped him in a soft rabbit skin, for Sidon, placed him on Han Mae's chest. The boy fell silent. He found her breast. He began to nurse. Han Mae lay there and wept quietly, soundlessly. Tears streamed down her cheeks and dripped onto her son's head. Chang Woo sat beside her. He was breathing heavily. His hands were covered in blood. His knees were trembling, but he was smiling. He stepped out onto the porch. Yuri was sleeping on Gray's side. The wolf didn't move. He was guarding her sleep. Chang Woo leaned down and touched his daughter on the shoulder. Yuri opened her eyes. He told her she had a little brother. Yuri blinked. Then she jumped up. She ran into the house. Chang Woo stayed on the porch. He sat down on a step. He put his hands on his knees. He looked at the forest. Dawn was breaking in a pink streak over their fir trees. The frost was biting, but quiet. No wind. No movement. The taiga stood still, and Chang Woo felt that the forest was listening. Not him. A child's cry. The forest heard that new life had appeared within its borders, and it responded. Not with a sound, with a sensation. Warmth traveled from the ground up through the steppe, up his legs, up his back, to the back of his neck, as if someone had placed a heavy, warm hand on his shoulder. He named his son Lee Han Sol. Han from his mother, Sol from the word for pine. Because the first thing the boy saw through the window were the three cedars at the entrance. They had already grown taller than the roof. A week had passed. Han Mae was recovering slowly, painfully. The birth had taken a lot out of her. She lay there and nursed Han Sol. Chang Woo did everything else. He cooked, he cleaned, he carried water. He did the laundry. He looked after Yuri. He stoked the stove. He checked the traps. He repaired the roof, which had caved in under the weight of the snow overnight. He slept no more than 4 hours a day. His body protested. His muscles ached. His eyes grew heavy. But he worked because now was not the time to stop. Yuri helped in her own way, in a 4-year-old's way. She carried moss to the stove. She handed him tools. She watched over her brother while their mother slept. She sat next to his bed and watched him intently. If Han Sol started crying, Yuri would call for her father loudly and sternly. She sternly called her father whenever the baby started crying. Chang Woo would come. He'd take his son, rock him. The boy was strong, healthy, he ate voraciously. He slept soundly. The baby screamed loudly enough to make Gray cover his ears. On the 10th day after the birth, Chang Woo began carving a crib, a cradle out of cedar. The very same cedar that grew by the entrance and that had to be trimmed because the lower branches were getting in the way. He cut off one branch, a thick one with dense, smooth wood. The cedar smelled of resin, a warm scent alive. He carved the cradle into days. A semicircular bottom, high sides, runners for rocking. On the back, he carved 3 cedars, the very ones standing at the entrance. Roughly carved but recognizable. Yuri watched him work. Then she asked why she had an owl on her bed and her little brother had cedars. Chang Woo replied that the owl was keeping watch and the cedars were growing. Because Yuri was already strong, but Han Sol still had to grow up. Yuri thought about it. She nodded. It made sense. The cradle stood by the stove. Han Sol lay in it staring at the ceiling. The ceiling was made of dark large logs, ugly, low, but warm and dry. Han Mae sat down next to the cradle. She touched the carved cedars on the backrest. She looked at her husband. She asked when he had learned to carve wood. Chang Woo didn't answer. He just smiled. Han Mae didn't press the issue, but her eyes said what her lips didn't utter. Her eyes silently questioned who this changed husband truly was and how he knew so much. She was afraid to ask, afraid of the answer. Because any answer could mean that the husband she knew no longer existed. And this new person in his body could be anyone. But this new person had built a house. This new person had delivered the baby. This new person had carved a cradle with cedars and a crib with an owl. Han Mae stopped demanding an answer because this changed husband had protected them completely. On the 12th night after the birth, Chang Woo heard a knock at the gate. Gray jumped up. The hair on his neck stood on end. A low growl. Chang Woo grabbed an axe. He went out. The moon shone brightly. The snow glistened. A figure stood at the gate, one, small, unsteady. Chang Woo approached. He opened the gate. A woman stood in the snow. Young, in a tattered hunting jacket. Her hair was tangled. Her face was covered in blood. Deep parallel scratches ran down her shoulder. Claws. A large beast. She looked up, dark eyes, burning, angry, and frightened at the same time. She said one word. She managed one desperate request for help, and fell into the snow. Behind her something was moving in the forest. Shadows between the trees. Large, silent, feline. Snow leopards. 2, no, 3. They stood at the edge of the clearing. They didn't come any closer, as if something were holding them back. A boundary, a circle. Marks on the trees. The forest wouldn't let them in. Chang Woo lifted the woman, lightweight, thin, but sinewy. Her hands calloused from the bowstring, a hunter. He carried her into the house. Later on the bench, Han Mae was no longer asleep. She saw the blood. She turned pale, but she didn't freeze. She stood up, brought water, rags. Chang Woo washed the wounds, deep, down to the flesh, but clean. The claws had run parallel without touching the bone. She was lucky. He applied a bandage of moss and clean cloth. The woman was unconscious, breathing in gasps. Chang Woo looked at her hands, at her clothes. A jacket made of fine leather. Thin, tanned, not a peasant's. An empty sheath on her belt. She'd lost the knife while running. A bow holder on her back. No bow. She'd lost that too, or broken it. Hunting boots, sturdy, lined with wolf fur. This wasn't a village girl who got lost in the woods. She was an aristocrat, a huntress from a noble clan. Han Mae noticed it too. She whispered that the jacket bore a coat of arms. Chang Woo looked. A symbol was embroidered on the inside of the collar. A falcon's head within a circle of arrows. Han Mae paled even further. She said it was the Seo clan, a noble hunting house, vassals of Duke Cho, one of the most influential families of the Northern Ridge. Chang Woo looked at the wounded woman, then at his wife. He asked if it mattered. Han Mae paused. Then she quietly replied that the Seo clan does not forgive debts. If they help this woman, the Seo clan will consider them indebted. And a debt to the Seo clan is a collar that cannot be removed. Chang Woo nodded. She quietly accepted the danger. Then he looked at the woman on the bench, at the blood seeping through her bandage, at her ragged breathing. And he replied that there were 3 leopards beyond the wall. If they left her outside the gate, she would die before dawn. And he would not send wounded people to their deaths for any debt. Han Mae pressed her lips together, not out of anger, out of fear. Because she knew her husband was right, and she knew it would cost them dearly. She didn't argue. She took a clean cloth. She changed the bandage. She gave the wounded woman water, drop by drop. Chang Woo stepped out onto the porch. The leopards were still standing. At the edge of the forest, 3 pairs of glowing eyes. He looked at them. They looked at him. Then the oldest one, the largest one, turned and walked into the thicket. The others followed him. The forest closed its gates behind them. Silence. Gray stood next to Chang Woo. He didn't growl. He just stood there. The wolf and the man stared into the dark forest. Somewhere deep in the thicket, near a stone circle that Chang Woo hadn't yet seen, something stirred in its sleep. It turned and fell silent again. The wait wouldn't be long. The hunter's name was Soa, 22 years old, the youngest daughter of the head of the Seo clan. She came to on the 2nd day, opened her eyes, saw a ceiling made of large logs, unfamiliar, tried to sit up. Pain in her shoulder knocked her back down. She hissed through. Han Mae was sitting nearby, holding Han Sol in her arms. She said calmly that she shouldn't move. The wounds were deep. If they reopened, it would be bad. So I looked at her, then at the child, then at the walls. She asked where she was. Han Mae replied that she was at Cedar Court. So I frowned. She said she didn't know such a place. Han Mae nodded. She said it hadn't existed until recently. Chang Woo entered with an armful of firewood. He set it down by the stove. He looked at So-ah. She looked at him, an appraising gaze, piercing, professional. She read him like a hunter reads a trail. Thin, weary, hands covered in calluses, rough clothing. A peasant. but his movements were different. Not those of a peasant. Confident, economical, not a single superfluous gesture. She asked who he was. Chang Woo replied that he was a woodcutter. So I didn't believe him. It was clear from her eyes. But she didn't ask any further. Instead, she asked about the snow leopards. Chang Woo said they had left. So I exhaled. She closed her eyes. Then she spoke quietly. She had been hunting alone. It was a violation of clan rules, but she always hunted alone. 3 snow leopards had cornered her in a ravine. She killed one. The second broke her bow. The third clawed her shoulder. She ran for 2 days without food, without weapons. She saw smoke from a chimney and headed toward it. Chang Woo listened. Then he asked why she had been hunting alone in such weather. So I remained silent for a long time. Then she said that in the clan she was no longer allowed to hunt. Her father had decided to marry her off to the son of the Duke's advisor. A business deal, a daughter in exchange for a tax reduction. She had gone into the forest never to return. Han Mae froze. She understood. So I hadn't gotten lost. So I had run away. That changed everything. A runaway from the Seo clan in their home. If the clan found out, they would decide that Chang Woo had stolen her, or was holding her by force. Or worse, she looked at her husband. Chang Woo caught her gaze. He nodded. He understood too. But he didn't change his mind. So I was staying for the next 2 weeks. So I lay in bed. Her wounds healed slowly. The deep cuts on her shoulder became infected on the 3rd day. Chang Woo washed them with pine needles decoction. That was all he had. An antiseptic made from fir needles. Weak, but better than nothing. The fever started on the 4th day. So I tossed and turned on the bench. She was delirious, calling out someone's name, her mother. Long dead. Han Mae didn't leave her side. She changed the rags on her forehead, gave her water. Chang Woo searched the forest for anything that might help. The forest answered. On the 2nd day of the fever, he found a bush of winter. Berries under an old uproot. The berries were small, black, bitter, but he knew them. In a past life, the Evunks called them bear's blood, a fever reducer, a powerful one. He mashed the berries into a paste, mixed it with warm water, fed it to So-ah drop by drop. By morning, the fever had subsided. By evening, she opened her eyes. Clear, focused. The first thing she saw was Yuri. The girl was sitting on the floor next to the bench, weaving a wreath from fir branches. No one understood why Yuri needed a wreath of fir branches in winter. But she worked with total concentration. Concentrated expression that So-ah couldn't help but smile. Her first smile, so barely noticeable, but genuine. When So-ah began to stand up, the world of Cedar Court struck her. She had grown up in the fortress of the Seo clan. Stone walls, 100 servants, armories, hunting trophies on the walls. Here, there was a single room, a stove, a table, 2 beds, a cradle, a shelf with pots, and yet it was warmer here than in the fortress. Not in temperature, something else. Yuri fed Gray pieces of smoked meat and ordered him to sit. Gray sat. Han Mae fed Han Sol while simultaneously tallying supplies on a board her husband had covered with soot for notes. She ran a stick through the soot and muttered numbers. Chang Woo was carving something out of wood by the stove. Wood shavings fell to the floor. Gray picked up the largest ones and carried them to the corner. No one knew why the wolf needed the shavings, but he collected them. So I watched all this and didn't understand. She saw a family, a real one, working as a single mechanism without shouting. No orders, no hierarchy of elders and juniors. A man carves a piece of wood. A woman counts the supplies. A girl commands the wolf. A baby sleeps. She had never seen anything like it, and so his clan. The father didn't speak to the children. The mother didn't count the supplies. Servants didn't sit at the same table as their masters. But here, everything was different. So I began to help. At first, with small tasks. She sharpened knives. She mended loops. She repaired her own jacket, then more. She was a hunter, the best in the Seo clan. Even with a broken shoulder, she could read tracks better than Chang Woo. She would go out with him to check the tracks and silently pointed them out. She identified a fox's overnight trail, a marten's hollow, and the feeding ground used by deer the previous day. So I identified a fox's overnight trail, a marten's hollow, and the feeding ground used by deer the previous day. Together, they covered twice as much territory, a week after her recovery. So I saw Chang Woo touching the trees for the first time. He was standing by an old cedar, his hand on the bark. His eyes were closed. His face was focused. She approached quietly. She stopped 5 paces away. She watched. Chang Woo opened his eyes. He said there was a bear's den 2 kilometers to the south. The bear is sleeping. Don't disturb it. So I asked how he knew. Chang Woo paused. Then he said the forest had shown him. So I looked at him for a long time. Then she turned and walked away. That evening, she sat by the stove and said nothing. Han Mae noticed. She sat down. She said quietly that her husband had changed after his exile, that she didn't understand everything either. But she trusted him. So I looked at Han Mae. Then at the cradle, where Han Sol was sleeping. Then at the crib where Yuri was sleeping with an owl on the headboard. She replied quietly that in the Seo clan, they weren't taught to trust men. Han Mae smiled. She said it was the same in the Lee clan. They looked at each other, not friends, not sisters. Two women cast aside by the world as unwanted, and who had ended up in the same house by chance. That was the beginning. Awkward, cautious, but a beginning. At that moment, Chang Woo was standing on the porch looking into the forest. He sensed something far away to the northwest. Movement, not animal, human. Someone was approaching his territory, not one, several. He didn't know who, but the forest knew, and the forest was restless. They came 3 days later, 5 of them. Chang Woo saw them long before they reached the stockade. The forest had warned him. The trees along the path relayed the alarm like sentinels on a wall. Someone foreign, someone with weapons, someone evil. Chang Woo stood at the gate with an axe at his belt. Grace sat beside him. He didn't growl. He waited. So I stood on the roof of the winter hut with a homemade bow, crooked, weak. Chang Woo had made it from ash wood in a single evening, so I called it a stick with a string. But she'd taken it, and now she stood up there with 3 arrows and a stick with a string looking us. If she could stop an army. 5 men emerged from the forest, the clothing of the Lee clan, for hats, short spears, axes. One carried a shield made of bull hide. Lee Dong-ho led the way, the nephew of elder Lee Dok-soo. 30 years old, broad-shouldered, square jaw, small eyes. He stopped 20 paces from the gate. He looked at the palisade, at the smoke from the chimney, at the cedars by the entrance that towered above the roof, at the wolf. His face went blank. He had expected to find corpses, or at best a pitiful shack with half-dead outcasts. But he found a courtyard with a gate, with a smokehouse, with smoke, with a wolf and an armed woman on the roof. Lee Dong-ho cleared his throat. He turned to Chang Woo. He said he had come on behalf of elderly Dok-soo and the clan council. He said the clan had reconsidered the decision to exile him. He said Chang Woo could return with his wife, with his children. All debts are forgiven. All charges are dropped. All he needs to do is pack his things and go. Chang Woo listened silently, his face unmoving. He knew why they had come, not out of mercy, out of hunger. 3 months had passed since the banishment. Winter had hit the Lee clan hard. Without salt, the meat rotted. Without meat, the people grew weak. The Duke's foragers had taken half the grain supply. The children were sick. The elderly were dying. And then rumors reached the clan. Smoke in the black taiga, the smell of smoked meat. A man who lives in the forest is its master. The clan sent out scouts. The scouts returned wide-eyed. There was a courtyard. There was a stockade. There was meat hanging in a smokehouse. There were cedars growing in winter. Elderly Dok-soo gritted his teeth and sent his nephew to bring back the wayward woodcutter with supplies. Chang Woo looked at Lee Dong-ho, then at the from men behind him. Spears, axes, a shield. Envoys of peace do not come armed. This is not an invitation. The armed visit was an ultimatum, demanding voluntary return before the clan used force. Chang Woo answered calmly. He said he thanked the council for reconsidering its decision. He said he appreciated the clan's concern, and he said he would not return. Lee Dong-ho blinked. He hadn't expected that. No one renounces the clan. The clan is protection. The clan is walls. The clan is life. To renounce the clan is to renounce life. It had always been that way. That's what everyone thought. But Chang Woo stood before him alive, well-fed, calm, with a courtyard behind him and a wolf at his feet, and he refused. Lee Dong-ho flushed. He stepped forward. He said that Chang Woo didn't understand. That this wasn't a request. That the elder was demanding it. Chang Woo didn't budge. He replied that the elder had banished him to the winter forest with his pregnant wife and 4-year-old daughter, that it was a death sentence, that he had survived not because of the clan, but in spite of it, and that now he owed nothing to anyone. Lee Dong-ho gripped his spear. The 4 behind him moved closer. Grace stood up. The fur on his neck bristled. A low growl rose from his throat. Not loud, deep, a growl like that makes something inside a person tighten. Instinctive, ancient. So on the roof drew her bow, a stick with a string. But the arrow was aimed at Lee Dong-ho's chest and her hand didn't tremble. Lee Dong-ho assessed the situation. A wolf. an archer on high ground, a narrow gate that 5 men couldn't take. On the first try, a palisade. He wasn't a coward, but he wasn't a fool either. He backed down. He said Chang Woo would regret it. He said the elder wouldn't forgive refusal. He said the clan would return and next time there would be no talking. He turned around. He left, for men followed him. Chang Woo stood and watched them go. When their figures disappeared behind the trees, he exhaled. His hands were shaking, not from fear, from tension. He had held his ground in front of 5 armed men and never once let on that inside. Everything was tied in a knot. So I climbed down from the roof. She approached. She looked at him. She said he was a madman. 5 men with weapons and 1 woodcutter with an axe. Chang Woo smirked. He replied that he also had a wolf and a stick with a rope. So I didn't smile, but something in her eyes had changed. Han Mae stood in the doorway. Han Sol in her arms, Yuri by her skirt, her face pale, but calm. She had heard everything. She knew the clan would return, and she knew that next time they wouldn't just wave their spears and leave. Chang Woo approached her. He said quietly that they needed to prepare. Han Mae nodded. Over the next few days, Chang Woo worked with redoubled effort. He reinforced the palisade. He drove in additional stakes. He sharpened the tips. He dug a shallow trench around the fence. He camouflaged it with pine branches and snow. Not a deadly trap, but enough to trip someone up. So I helped. She knew defense better than he did. She set up warning lines. Thin twine stretched between the trees outside the palisade. She tied a wooden rattle to each one. If anyone touched it, it would rattle. Primitive, but it would be enough at night. Chang Woo watched her and saw a professional, not just a hunter. A warrior. She moved through the forest like a shadow. She set traps faster than he could chop wood. Every step was calculated, every decision precise. So I noticed his gaze. She frowned. She asked what he was looking at. Chang Woo replied that she was doing a great job. So I froze, as if he had said something impossible. In the clan, they told her she shot worse than her brothers, that she ran slower, that she brought back less game, that she disgraced the family name by hunting alone instead of sitting in the fortress and waiting for a husband. Not once. Not a single person in 22 years had told her she was doing a great job. She turned quickly so you wouldn't see her face, but Chang Woo noticed and remembered. At night, he lay there and thought. He knew the clan would return and 5 defenders, wooden walls and limited weapons would never be enough. The forest was silent, but the silence was unnerving, like the calm before the storm. Chang Woo closed his eyes. Sleep wouldn't come. Instead of sleep, a vision came. A stone circle in the middle of a clearing. 8 stones in a circle, tall, gray, overgrown with moss. And in the center of the circle, a woman, the very one, tall, with long black hair. She stood there and looked at him. She wasn't smiling. Her eyes were sad, ancient. She raised her hand and pointed north. The vision directed him north. Chang Woo woke up. His heart was pounding. He knew the vision was real. The forest had shown it to him. In the morning, he told Han Mae he was leaving for the day. He needed to check the northern border. Han Mae looked at him. She could tell he wasn't telling her everything, but she nodded. So, volunteered to go with him. Chang Woo agreed. It was safer together. They walked north for 2 hours, Chang Woo in front, So followed behind him silently. She didn't ask where they were going. She just walked. The forest around them changed. The fir trees grew taller, thicker, older. The undergrowth disappeared. Snow lay in an even untouched blanket. No tracks, no animal tracks, no human ones either. As if no one had set foot here for years, for decades. So notice this. She said quietly that there was no game here. Chang Woo nodded. He sensed why. The forest here was different, not hostile, but closed off. Like a house with a locked door. There is an entrance, but not for everyone. He walked and the trees parted, not physically. He simply knew where to place his foot. The path laid itself beneath his feet, so followed him and saw it. She saw that the forest let him through, as if he were the master, and she didn't understand. 2 hours later, they came out into a clearing. Round, flat, 30 meters across. In the middle of the clearing stood a stone circle, 8 stones, chest high, gray, smooth, covered in moss and lichen. Lines emerged on the ground between the stones, furrows in the frozen earth, a pattern not random, carved by someone's hand long ago. A very long time ago. Chang Woo stepped into the circle quietly, slowly, as if entering a stranger's house. Stayed outside, not because she was afraid, but because she felt she didn't belong there. Inside the circle, the air was different, a few degrees warmer. A thin layer of snow lay in the center, as if the earth beneath it were warm. Chang Woo dropped to his knees. He placed his hands on the ground and a world opened up. Not with an explosion. Smoothly, like a scroll unfolding. He saw her, Sunhee, that was her name. The first mistress of the thicket. 250 years ago, she was a hunter, an ordinary one. A hunter from a small village on the edge of the Black Taiga. The forest chose her just as it chose him for her respect. For taking exactly what was needed and not a handful more. She built a settlement. She took an outcast. She planted trees. She created a place where winter didn't kill. She was strong, smart, brave. She did everything that Chang Woo had begun to do, only earlier, only alone. Then the dukes came, not one, three. 3 duchies united against her because she had become too strong, because people were flocking to her, because her forest principality was undermining their power. They came with fire. They burned the forest. They burned the villages. They burned the people. Sony fought. The forest fought for her. But fire is stronger than the forest. She lost, but she didn't die. They couldn't kill her. The forest wouldn't let them, so they did something else. They sealed her away. 3 ducal shamans drove 8 stones into the ground and closed the circle alive. Into the ground for 300 years. Chang Woo withdrew his hands. He was shaking. His fingers were icy. Though the earth inside the circle was warm. He stood up. His legs wouldn't hold him. He leaned against a stone. The stone hummed against his back, a low vibration, like a heartbeat. So I approached the edge of the circle. She asked what he had seen. Chang Woo looked at her for a long time. Then he told the truth. He said that beneath these stones lay a woman alive. For 300 years. So I turned pale. She asked who she was. Chang Woo replied that she had been here before him. She did the same thing. She built. She protected. She took in the outcast. And for that, they buried her alive. So I was silent. She looked at the stones. Then she quietly asked what he was going to do. Chang Woo replied that he didn't know, not yet. But he would find out. They returned to Cedar Court before dark. Chang Woo didn't tell Han Mae about the stone circle, not because he was hiding it, because he didn't know how to explain it. His wife was holding a baby, their 4-year-old daughter, the threat from the Lee clan. She didn't need another burden. So I was silent, too. But in the evenings, she would gaze northward for a long time toward where, among the old fir trees, stood a stone circle with a living heartbeat beneath the earth. A week after the trip north, Chang Woo was setting new traps at the far edge of the territory, and he heard a sound. Not a wolf's howl. Not a bird's cry, a whimper, quiet, lamenting. He went toward the sound. Under a fallen fir tree, in a hollow, lay a creature, small, thin, hunchbacked, covered in gray fur. Chang Woo moved closer. The creature raised its head. A face, human, young, a girl's, but the ears were sharp, pointed, sticking up from beneath tangled hair. The eyes were amber, animal-like. A tail stuck out from beneath a torn shirt, gray. A wolf's, a half-wolf, beast people. Chang Woo knew of them. From the memories of the former Chang Woo, tribes of half-people living deep in the Black Taiga. Half-wolves, half-deer, half-foxes. People considered them beast. Beasts considered them people. They were neither one nor the other. The girl lay in the pit and whimpered. Her body was covered in scrapes, old bruises, fresh cuts, not from claws, from hands. Someone had beaten her for a long time, methodically. Chang Woo climbed down into the pit. The girl crawled away. She growled weakly. Her teeth were bared, but there was no rage in her eyes, fear. Chang Woo stopped, crouched down, reached out his hand, palm up, like you'd offer to a dog. The girl looked at his hand, at his face, at his hand, sniffed. Her nose twitched. She could sense him, sense the forest on him. Slowly, very slowly, she crawled closer. She touched his fingers with her nose. Cold, wet, like a puppy's. Chang Woo didn't move. She sniffed his hand, then his wrist. Then she backed away. She lay down. The whimpering stopped. She looked at him and waited. Chang Woo took off his outer shirt, warm, made of deerskin. He laid it next to her. The girl grabbed it, wrapped herself in it instantly like a little animal crawling into a burrow. He handed her a piece of smoked meat from his pocket. She ate it in 3 bites, didn't chew, just swallowed. Hungry, had been hungry. For a long time, Chang Woo sat and waited. An hour later, she let him come closer. 2 hours later, she let him pick her up. He carried her in his arms to Cedar Court. She weighed as much as a child. Bones under her skin, ribs sticking out, her tail wrapped around his arm. Yuri saw her first. She ran out to meet her. She stopped. She looked at the pointed ears, at the tail, at the amber eyes. Then she turned to her father. She asked who it was. Chang Woo replied that it was a new person in their home. Yuri nodded. Seriously. She walked over to the girl, stroked her head just like Gray. The girl froze. Then she pressed herself against Yuri and cried, silently. Only her shoulders shook. Her name was Han Mae, 19 years old, a half-wolf from the northern tribe of the Greys, banished from the pack for refusing to kill a captive human. Among the beast folk, this was considered a weakness, a defect. She had wandered the forest alone for 2 months, ate whatever she found, slept in holes. Chang Woo found her, or perhaps the forest led him to her. It didn't matter anymore. Han Mae accepted her in silence. She gave her soup. She gave her a warm spot by the stove. She asked no questions. So looked at Han Mae warily. A hunter from a noble clan and a half-wolf from the taiga. Between them stood a wall of generations of fear and hatred. Humans hunted beast men. Beast folk attacked humans. This had gone on for centuries. So Ah placed her hand on her knife and didn't remove it all evening. Han Mae could sense it. She sat in the corner. She didn't move. Yuri walked over to So-Ah. She took her hand. She said that Han Mae was good like Gray, only smaller. So-Ah looked at the 4-year-old girl. She looked at the half-wolf in the corner. She took her hand off the knife. Not because she believed it, because Yuri asked her to. Gray walked over to Han Mae, sniffed her. She sniffed him. They looked at each other. A wolf and a half-wolf. Gray lay down next to her, pressed his side against hers. Han Mae closed her eyes. For the first time in 2 months, she wasn't sleeping in a pit. She was warm. She was next to someone. Cedar Court was growing. The 5th month began with a thaw, a rarity in the Black Taiga in winter. The temperature rose to -10. The snow became heavy and wet. The roof sagged. Chang Woo spent a day repairing it. He added supports, reinforced the beams. Han Mae grumbled that they just fixed it, and now this again. But she grumbled in a domestic way without malice. The familiar grumbling heard inside a family where everything was safe. Han Mae settled in faster than anyone expected. She spoke little, 3 or 4 words a day. But she understood everything. She knew the language of humans. The beast folk traded with the outlying villages. She helped silently, carried water, chopped small branches, hauled firewood. Her hands were stronger than they looked. She lifted logs that Chang Woo could barely carry. The bones of beast folk were denser than those of humans. Their muscles were stronger. But her greatest gift was something else. Han Mae could sense the animals, not like Chang Woo through the forest, directly. She could hear wolves a kilometer away. She could sense a deer's trail from 3 days ago. She knew where the fox would pass tonight. Gray followed her as if on a leash. They communicated. Not with words, not with gestures. With something animalistic that Chang Woo couldn't grasp. Gray whined. Han Mae answered with a soft growl. And the two of them, they returned an hour later. Gray was content. Han Mae had a couple of hairs or an armful of frozen berries. Yuri declared Han Mae her older sister. It happened on the 3rd day. Yuri approached her. She stood beside her. She said that now Han Mae was her older sister. Han Mae froze. Her ears flattened against her head. Her tail tucked between her legs. She didn't know what to make of it. In her tribe, no one chose their family. Family was determined by blood. But Yuri, just 4 years old, simply walked over and decided. Han Mae dropped to her knees. She looked Yuri in the eyes, amber against hazel, and nodded. Yuri nodded back. Businesslike. The matter was settled. From that day on, Han Mae slept next to Yuri's crib. On the floor. On the furs. Her tail hung over the edge. Yuri would sometimes touch it in her sleep. And Han Mae wouldn't wake up. Or she pretended not to. So I thawed more slowly. She didn't quarrel with Han Mae. She just kept her distance. 2 worlds that never intersected. A hunter from the stone fortress and a half-wolf from the taiga. But 2 weeks later, something happened that changed the dynamic. So I went hunting alone. She headed east. Chang Woo didn't stop her. She's a hunter. It's her nature. To lock her behind walls would be to kill her. She left in the morning and hadn't returned by lunchtime. She hadn't returned by evening. Chang Woo grew worried. He wanted to go look for her. Han Mae stopped him. She stood at the gate. She shook her head. Then she went into the forest, alone and armed, on all 4s. It was faster that way. She ran through the snow like a wolf, low to the ground, silently, quickly. She found So-Ah 2 hours later. The hunter was lying at the bottom of a ravine. Her leg was stuck between the roots, dislocated. Not broken, but she couldn't stand up. The cold was already getting to her. Her hands were white. Her lips were blue. Han Mae climbed down into the ravine. She hoisted So-Ah onto her back. So-Ah weighed more than she did. But Han Mae carried her. She walked through the snow barefoot and carried her. She brought her to the gate. She laid her down by the porch. She looked at Chang Woo. She said nothing. She went to the stove. She lay down. She fell asleep. So I lay on the bench. Chang Woo set her ankle. He applied a bandage. So I stared at the ceiling. Then she quietly asked why the half-wolf had done that. Chang Woo replied that Nambai lives in this house. Everyone who lives in this house protects one another. So Ah closed her eyes. In the morning she went over to Nambai. Nambai was sitting by the stove combing Yuri's hair with the bone comb. So Ah sat down next to her. Silently, she took a piece of dried meat out of her pocket. She placed it next to Nambai. Nambai looked at the meat. Then at So Ah, she took it. Took a bite. So Ah nodded. She stood up. She left. Yuri looked at Nambai. She said that So Ah was nice. Just angry. Nambai snorted quietly. Almost a laugh. The first sound resembling laughter in all that time. Chang Woo saw this from across the table, where he was carving a new spoon. And he thought that 4-year-old Yuri handled diplomacy better than the clan elders. A week later something else happened. Chang Woo was working by the stream clearing the ice to fetch water, and he heard voices, human voices, distant from the south. He froze. He listened. The voices were getting closer. Not the Lee clan others. A woman's voice, a child crying. He went to meet them. Half an hour later he came out onto the trail. A woman was standing on the trail, thin, exhausted in tattered clothes. She was holding a boy of about 6 by the hand. She was carrying a girl of about 3 on her back. An old man was walking beside her, hunched over with a cane. Behind the old man were 2 more children. A boy and a girl, 8-year-old twins, all blue from the cold, all hungry, all at their limit. The woman saw Chang Woo. She stopped, fear in her eyes and hope. She said they were from the village of Lissy Cooter, 20 versts to the south. The village was deserted. The Duke's foragers had taken all the grain. The old people had died of starvation. The young people had gone to the city. She had stayed behind with the children and the old man. They had been walking for 3 days. They had been eating bark. They heard from a wandering hunter that there was a man in the black taiga, a man who had food and a roof over his head. She asked if it was true. Chang Woo looked at her, at the children, at the old man who could barely stand, at the twins who huddled silently together. He turned, told them to follow him. He led them to Cedar Court. Han Mae saw them and didn't say a word. She put a pot on the fire. She took out some smoked meat. She sliced some bread. There wasn't much bread. She baked it from flour that Chang Woo had ground from wild grain Nambai had found on the southern slope. Coarse, tough, but bread. She sliced it and handed it out to the children. The children ate and cried. The old man ate and said nothing. The woman's name was Park Soon. The old man's was Kim Dae. He was not related to her. He was the village blacksmith, the only blacksmith in the village. His hands trembled from hunger and cold, but when Chang Woo showed him his axe, the old man took it. He examined it, ran his finger along the blade, and said it was good steel, northern forging, about 60 years old. His eyes lit up for a second. Chang Woo smiled. A blacksmith. He had a blacksmith now. In the evening he sat on the porch. He counted. There were 2, then 3, then 4, then 5, now 11. 6 adults and 5 children. There was enough food for everyone for a month, maybe a month and a half. Then he'd have to get more, much more. He looked at the forest. The forest stood dark and silent, but Chang Woo felt its approval, warm, steady, like a hand on his shoulder. He took people in. The forest responded. The forest's doubled return seemed to work through people as well as game. The blacksmith changed everything. Kim Dae was old, 62 years old. His back was bent. His hands were covered in burns and scars from 40 years at the anvil. But those hands knew metal as well as Chang Woo knew wood. On the very first day after the old man had slept and eaten 3 times, he went out into the yard. He looked around. He touched the palisade. He twirled a knife in his hands. He looked at the wire hinges. Then he turned to Chang Woo. He said they needed a smithy. Chang Woo nodded. He knew. Without metal, a principality is no principality. Wooden stakes could not stop a serious force, and stone knives could not butcher an elk efficiently. Cedar Court needed nails and hinges. They also needed arrowheads, rafter brackets, and dependable metal tools. Chang Woo and Kim Dae built the smithy together in 10 days. Chang Woo chopped and hewn. Kim Dae gave the orders. They chose a spot by a stream, water nearby for quenching, a west wind for the draft, a stone foundation, log walls, a roof with a wide chimney opening. Kim Dae made the anvil from a boulder. He found a flat granite stone by the stream. He hewed the top, edged roughly, but smooth enough. He built the bellows out of clay and stone. The bellows were made of deer hide. The pipe was made of clay fired in a kiln. A lot of charcoal was needed. Chang Woo knew how to make charcoal. In his past life, Ivan Sokolov burned charcoal every autumn. Charcoal burning, an old craft. A pit in the ground. Firewood stacked in a cone, clay and sod on top. Light it from below, seal the draft. The wood doesn't burn, but smolders. 3 days, the result is charcoal twice as hot as regular firewood. He dug the first charcoal pit the day after construction began. Birch, the best charcoal comes from birch. 3 days of waiting, then he dug it up, black chunks. Lightweight, ringing when struck against one another. Kim Dae examined the fracture, nodded, and judged the charcoal strong enough for serious forging. They made their first smelting run with scrap iron. Chang Woo gathered everything he could find. Rusty nails from the winter hut's walls. A broken chain from the hideout to useless knives, pieces of iron wire. Not much, but it was enough to start with. Kim Dae lit the furnace. Nambai pumped the bellows steadily, rhythmically, without tiring. The beastman had enough strength for hours of continuous work. The forge roared. The coals glowed white with heat. The iron turned red, then yellow. Kim Dae worked in silence. He used tongs to pull out the red-hot metal. He placed it on the anvil. He struck it with a stone. Hammer bound to the handle with leather. A crude tool, but the old man struck with precision. Every blow in its place. Sparks flew. The metal sang under the hammer. Chang Woo watched. He wasn't a blacksmith. He was a carpenter and a forester. But he recognized craftsmanship when he saw it. Kim Dae stood bent over the anvil, old and bent, and struck with the hammer like a god. First came the nails, 20 a day, rough-hewn, different sizes, but nails. Real iron nails. With them, Chang Woo could build 3 times faster. Door hinges, window bolts, brackets for beams, hooks for meat in the smokehouse. Every nail was worth its weight in gold. Then arrowheads. Kim Dae forged them thin, long, with serrations. So stood nearby and told him what shape they needed. The old man listened. He made them. So took a finished arrowhead, turned it between her fingers, nodded or shook her head. Kim Dae remade it without a single word. By the end of the second week, So had 30 arrows with real iron arrowheads. She went out into the yard. She stuck a stick into the ground 50 paces away. She drew her crooked ash bow. She shot. The arrow veered a hand's breadth to the left. So grimaced. The bow was bad. She knew it. Chang Woo saw it, and he saw something else. So shot right-handed, but turned her shoulder unnaturally. Her left shoulder. It sat lower than her right, crooked. An old injury, he asked. So didn't answer. She turned away. He didn't press the issue, but he remembered. 3 days later, he approached Kim Dae. He asked for help. He explained what was needed. The old man listened. Then he nodded. Chang Woo began making a bow. Not like the first one, a different one. He worked with wood. Kim Dae worked with metal, a yew wood base. Chang Woo found the yew on the southern slope. The forest revealed it, a rare tree for these parts, flexible, springy. He carved the base into days, asymmetrical. The upper limb is 3 fingers longer than the lower one. The grip is shifted downward for the left arm with the broken shoulder. So the load goes to the forearm rather than the joint. Kim Dae forged metal plates, thin ones, for the ends of the arms, for rigidity, and a small plate for the grip, for a firm hold. Chang Woo twisted the bowstring from deer sinew. Strong, thin. So knew nothing. Chang Woo worked at night by the light of a torch, 3 nights. On the 4th morning, he went out into the yard. So was sitting on the porch straightening arrows. He approached. He handed her the bow. So looked up. She looked at the bow, then at Chang Woo. She took it. She turned it over in her hands. She knew weapons. She had grown up among weapons. She saw the asymmetry. She saw the offset grip. She saw the hand guards, and she understood. Her face took on a strange expression. Not angry, not grateful, confused. She stood up, raised the bow, pulled the string, and froze. Her left shoulder didn't hurt. For the first time in 12 years. She'd broken it when she was 10. Fallen off a horse while hunting. The bone had healed crooked. Ever since, every shot from the bow sent pain through her shoulder. Dull, aching, constant. She had learned to endure it. For 12 years she had shot with clenched teeth and told no one. Because in the Seo clan, complaining about pain means showing weakness. And the Seo clan does not keep the weak. She pulled the bowstring back to her ear, aimed at a stick 50 paces away. She shot. The arrow hit the center. So lowered the bow. She looked at it, at the handle, at the string. Then she sat down in the snow. Just like that, right in the middle of the courtyard. The bow on her knees, her hands on the bow. She wasn't crying. So of the Seo clan doesn't cry. But she sat in the snow and looked at her hands and didn't know what to do with the fact that it didn't hurt anymore. Chang Woo stood nearby. silently. He didn't touch her. He didn't speak. He just stood there. Yuri stepped out onto the porch. She saw So on the snow. She sat beside the huntress and leaned close. So rested one hand on Yuri's head, reaching toward warmth while emotionally frozen. Yuri accepted the touch without hesitation. Han Mae watched from the doorway with Han Sol secure in her arms. She watched. She smiled quietly. She understood. Maybe not everything, but the main thing. Her husband doesn't just make things. He makes things for a specific person. The shelf isn't just a shelf. It's at that height where Han Mae can comfortably reach it. Yuri's crib isn't just a crib. It has an owl that keeps watch. Han Sol's cradle isn't just a cradle. It's made of cedar that grew by the entrance. And So's bow isn't just a bow. It's for her broken shoulder. For her pain, for her 12 years of silence. That evening, Chang Woo sat by the stove. Kim Dae was beside him. The old man warmed his hands. He was silent. Then he said that Chang Woo was a strange man, that the blacksmith had seen many craftsmen in his lifetime. Good ones, bad ones, different ones. But none of them made things like this. Each one for specific hands, each one for specific pain. Chang Woo didn't answer. Kim Dae didn't expect an answer. He just said it. Then he added that if Chang Woo wanted him to, the blacksmith would stay until the end. Whatever that end might be. Chang Woo nodded. He shook the old man's hand. Outside, the wind was whipping snow across the yard. Gray lay on the porch. Nambai sat next to him and combed Yuri's hair. So was cleaning arrows. New arrows for a new bow. Park Soon was putting the children to bed. Han Mae rocked the cradle. Cedar Court was alive, small, cramped, packed to the rafters with people, but alive. And somewhere to the south, in the Lee clan's fortress, elderly Doxu sat at an empty table and stared at the empty shelves in the storeroom. There was enough grain left for a month. The meat had run out a week ago. 3 old men had died of exhaustion. The children were sick. The young men sharpened their axes and looked north, toward where a fire burned in the black taiga, and the smell of smoked meat hung in the air. War was approaching. Chang Woo could feel it. The forest could feel it. And so I was already counting the arrows. The Lee clan returned in the 7th month. Not with 5 men, but 20. With spears and axes and torches, Lee Dong-ho led them. Behind him walked the elderly Doxu himself. 60 years old, as thin as a large tree in winter, eyes yellow from hunger. His fur coat hung on him like a sack. He had lost half his weight since autumn. They had all lost weight. The 20 men of the Lee clan looked like shadows. Their cheekbones jutted out. Their eyes were sunken. Their hands trembled. They weren't going to fight. They were going to die or to take. There was no third option in their minds. Chang Woo knew they were coming. The forest had warned him a day earlier. The trees along the southern trail sent out a wave of alarm. Chang Woo gathered everyone in the evening. Han Mae, Soa, Nambai, Kim Dae, Park Soon. He said that tomorrow, a lot of them, 20 or more, armed. Soa stood up. She said she had 30 arrows and a good bow. She could take out 5 before they reached the stockade. Nambai quietly said that Gray would bring the wolves. She sensed a pack in the forest, 6 beasts, untamed, wild. But they obeyed Gray, and Gray obeyed Nambai. Kim Dae silently pulled for spears from under the workbench. He had forged them at night. He hadn't told anyone. He just forged them just in case. Chang Woo looked at them, at Soa with her burning eyes, at Nambai with her ears pinned back, at the old man with the spears. And he shook his head. He said they wouldn't fight. Han Mae looked at him. Soa frowned. She asked if he was joking. 20 armed men are coming to kill them, and he doesn't want to fight. Chang Woo replied that they weren't coming to kill. They were coming to eat. They were hungry. A hungry man with a spear isn't a warrior. He's just a hungry man with a spear. Soa clenched her teeth. She said that hungry men with spears killed just as well-fed ones. Chang Woo agreed, but he said he wouldn't kill people who had been his neighbors just 3 months ago. Soa said nothing. She didn't understand, but she didn't argue. In the morning, Chang Woo got up before dawn. He went out the gate. He headed south, alone, unarmed. Han Mae stood by the window and watched him leave. Her face was pale. Her hands were clenched into fists. She wanted to stop him. She wanted to shout. She didn't shout because she knew. This new husband, he did nothing without a reason. Soa stood on the roof with a bow. Nambai went into the forest. Gray went with her. Chang Woo walked along the path to the south. The forest around him was silent. But the silence was different, not anxious, attentive. The forest was watching. An hour later, he came upon them. 20 men stood in the clearing. They hadn't lit any fires. They sat in the snow. They ate bark. Grown men with weapons sat in the snow and chewed bark because there was nothing else. Lee Dong-ho saw him first. He jumped up, grabbed a spear. The others followed him, 20 pairs of eyes, hungry, angry, desperate. Chang Woo stopped, raised his empty hands, said he had come alone, unarmed, to talk. Lee Dong-ho bared his teeth, so the time for talking was over. That they had come to take back what belonged to the clan, that Chang Woo was the clan's woodcutter, and everything he had acquired rightfully belonged to the clan. Chang Woo calmly replied that he had been expelled, that an outcast loses all obligations to the clan, that this was their own law. Lee Dong-ho stepped forward. The spear was aimed at Chang Woo's chest. His voice trembled with anger and hunger. He said that the law is whatever the elder decides. Then Lee Dok-soo spoke, an old voice, hoarse, quiet. He told his nephew to lower the spear. Lee Dong-ho turned around. The elder stood behind everyone, leaning on a cane. His face was gray. He looked at Chang Woo for a long time. Then he said that 6 people had died in the clan over the past month. 3 old men, 2 children, 1 woman in childbirth because she didn't have the strength. He said this flatly, without emotion, as if talking about the weather. Chang Woo listened. Then he asked why the elder was telling him this. Lee Dok-soo replied that he wanted Chang Woo to know the price of his refusal. Chang Woo was silent for a moment. Then he said that he hadn't set the price, that it was the elder who had driven him out into the winter forest, that it was the elder who had sold salt to the duke, that it was the elder who made the decision that was now killing the clan. Lee Dok-soo was silent. 20 men were silent. The silence was oppressive. Chang Woo continued. He said they could kill him. They could take his supplies. It would last a month, maybe 2. And then what? Winter wasn't over. For months until spring. The meat would run out. The smokehouse wouldn't work without him. The traps wouldn't catch anything without him. They'd take the dead stock, and in 2 months they'd be chewing bark again. Lee Dong-ho gripped his spear, but he listened. Everyone listened. Chang Woo said there was another way. He wouldn't return to the clan, but he could trade smoked meat in exchange for labor. 10 men from the clan would come to work at Cedar Court. They'd chop wood, build houses, expand the territory. In return, their families would receive meat every week, regularly. Until spring. Lee Dok-soo looked at him. Yellow eyes on a gray face. He saw before him the man he had driven out 3 months ago, a quiet, downtrodden woodcutter. And now this man stood unarmed before 20 spears and offered terms as an equal, no, as a superior. The elder was silent for a long time. Then he spoke. Lee Dong-ho opened his mouth to object. Lee Dok-soo looked at him. One glance, the nephew fell silent. They left that same day. A week later, 10 men arrived with axes, unarmed, with meat sacks. Chang Woo met them at the gate. He assigned tasks: chopping, hewing, digging, building. Work was in full swing. In a month, Cedar Court had doubled in size. A new house for Park Soon and the children. A shed for the smithy, an expanded smokehouse, a second smokehouse, a storage shed for meat and grain, a road from the gate to the stream. 10 men of the Lee clan worked in silence and ate in the evening smoked meat and bread. They didn't speak to Chang Woo, didn't greet him, didn't thank him. But every week they carried sacks of meat back to their families, and every week they returned. Han Mae counted the supplies. The numbers on the board multiplied. Consumption increased. But the forest responded. The forest doubled. Return continued working. The more people lived and worked on the recognized territory, the more generous the forest was. Deer came out to the traps. Hares multiplied. Fish swam into the holes in the stream. Chang Woo expanded the circle. He walked the new boundary. He marked 12 trees instead of 8. The territory doubled. In the 2nd month after the deal with the clan, a monk came to the gate. A former monk, defrocked. Park Jong-min, 40 years old, skinny with kind, weary eyes. He said he was walking from a monastery in the south. The monastery had been closed. The duke had taken the land. The monks were dispersed. He had heard of Cedar Court. He asked if he could help. Chang Woo asked what he could do. The monk replied that he could read and write and count and knew herbs and prayers and could teach children. Chang Woo opened the gate. Spring of the first year came late. The snow began to melt only toward the end of the 9th month, slowly, stubbornly, as if winter didn't want to let go. But the earth beneath the snow was alive. Chang Woo could feel it with his palms when he touched the soil, warm, moist, ready. He took out a small bag of seeds from Sunny's hiding place. He untied it. Inside were dry little seeds. He didn't know what they were, but the forest knew. When he poured a handful into his palm, the earth beneath his feet responded with warmth. These seeds had been waiting 150 years. He planted them on the southern slope where the earth warmed up first. He laid out the rows from memory of a past life, even at equal intervals. The forest growth blessing did the rest. A week later, sprouts emerged from the ground, green, strong. Han Mae stood over the beds and could not believe her eyes. Snow still lay in the shade, yet the southern slope was turning green. She asked what it was. Chang Woo replied that he didn't know, but it looked edible. It turned out to be wild rye, an ancient, frost-resistant variety. Its small but flavorful grain could become real bread instead of emergency root cakes. Not from pounded roots, but from flour. When Han Mae realized this, she sat down on the garden beds and sat there for a long time. Bread. They would have their own bread. At that moment, Sira appeared. She didn't come to the gate like the others. She emerged from the forest from the south, alone, with a leather bag slung over her shoulder. In the bag were jars, small pouches, and bundles of dried herbs. 26 years old, a thin face, a sharp gaze, a sarcastic crease at the corner of her mouth. She was dressed in city clothes, expensive, but dirty and torn from the long journey. She approached the gate. Grace stood up and growled. Nambai came out. She looked. She sniffed. She quietly told Chang Woo that the woman smelled of herbs and fear. Sira saw a half-wolf with ears and a tail. She saw a girl. She blinked. Then she said that either she had gone mad from hunger and was seeing things that weren't there, or there really was a girl with a tail talking to a man at the gate. Chang Woo smirked. He asked who she was. Sira replied that she was the former court apothecary of Duke Cho. She had fled the capital 3 weeks ago. The reason? The Duke had ordered her to prepare poison for Baron Kim Tae-sun. She refused. The Duke ordered her arrested. She fled. She walked through the Black Taiga. On the way, she nearly froze to death twice and was almost caught by foragers once. Peasants had described a place in the taiga where newcomers received food without interrogation. So she followed the rumors north. Chang Woo looked at her, at the bag of herbs, at her hands, slender, deft, with spots from plant sap on her fingers. A healer, a real one, educated. He opened the gate. Sira entered. She looked around, a stockade. 2 houses, a smithy. 2 smokehouses, a warehouse, children running, a wolf lying on the porch. A half-wolf woman is combing a little girl's hair. A woman with a bow sits on the roof and looks down at her. Sira exhaled. She said quietly that this was the strangest collective farm she had ever seen in her life. Chang Woo stopped. He looked at her. He asked how she knew that word. Sira frowned. She said she didn't know. That the word had just popped into her head, that it seemed fitting. Chang Woo nodded silently. He thought that the world was playing strange games with him. Sira proved invaluable. She knew herbs like no one else. Decoctions for fever, ointments for burns, tinctures for coughs. She examined all the residents of Cedar Court during the first week. She found worms in 3 of Park Soon's children. She cured them in 3 days with a decoction of wormwood and tansy. She found inflammation in Kim Dae's joints. She applied a compress of first sap. The old man was foraging without flinching the very next day. She found an old shoulder fracture and so she felt it. She shook her head. She said the bone had healed crookedly, and that in the city, this could only be treated with refracture and splinting. So I turned pale. Sira quickly added that this wasn't the city, and that the bow they'd made for her solved the problem better than any doctor. So I looked at Chang Woo. He pretended not to hear, but his ears had turned red. Han Mae noticed. Han Mae noticed everything. Sira and Chang Woo hit it off instantly. She was the only woman in Cedar Court who argued with him openly, loudly, with arguments. He said the greenhouses should be placed on the south slope. She said, on the southwest because the wind is weaker there, and the condensation won't freeze on the walls. He thought. She waited. He agreed. She nodded. Victory. Then he said that fish should be smoked over alder wood. She said over apple wood because fish smoked over apple wood keeps longer. He asked how she knew. She replied that she'd read books. He asked which books she had studied. Sira listed 10 titles before stopping, while he listened like a man discovering buried gold. Man who'd found a chest of gold. She asked why he was looking at her like that. He replied that it was nothing. Han Mae watched them with quiet recognition, realizing her husband had found another wounded person he could help rebuild. Chang Woo was building her a house, a separate one. Small, 2 rooms. One for living, the other for work. A drying rack under the ceiling for herbs, oak shelves for glass jars, a copper distillation cube. Kim Dae had mined the copper. He found a vein in the rock by the stream, a small one. But it was enough for a cube and 2 mortars. The brass mortars didn't work out, the copper ones did. Sira stood in the middle of her house and touched the shelves. She touched the cube. She touched the mortars. She was silent. Then she turned to Chang Woo. Her voice was steady. Her eyes were empty. She asked why he had done all this. Chang Woo replied that this was her house and her workshop, that here she could do whatever she wanted. No orders, no poisons for the Duke. Only what she herself decided. Sierra nodded. She turned away, quickly. Her voice wavered when she said that in that case she would make soap. With lavender. Because everyone in that backwater smelled like bears. Chang Woo laughed. His first loud laugh in months, while spring advanced outside. The snow was receding. Cedar Court was growing. 20 people. 25. 30. They came one by one, and in families. They arrived from villages, roads, and forest, hungry, frozen, and lost. Chang Woo opened the gates under one simple rule. Whoever came worked. Whoever worked ate. Whoever ate defended. Summer brought Emma Carter. She arrived in a wagon with 2 mules. Red-haired, freckled, blue-eyed. Unlike anyone else here, she spoke the local language fluently, but with a lilting accent that no one else here had. 24 years old, the daughter of a merchant from the southern coast, a descendant of foreign sailors who had washed up on these shores a generation earlier. A merchant, a smuggler, a diplomat, all rolled into one. She stopped the wagon at the gate. She looked at the stockade, at the smoke from the chimneys, at the cedars that had grown taller than the roofs, at the wolf lying by the entrance, at the half-wolf sitting on the fence, at the woman with the bowin. The watchtower raised 1 month earlier. She asked for the forest prince, and Chang Woo appeared wearing a work shirt with wood shavings. Work shirt with an axe at his belt, wood shavings in his hair. Emma looked at him, then at the axe, then at the shavings. She said she'd expected someone taller. Chang Woo asked how he could help. Emma replied that she'd heard about his smoked meat, about the soap, about the tar. She traded with distant villages, and the villages that bought from Cedar Court lived better than those that didn't. She wanted to become a middleman, to buy from him in bulk, sell in the south, split the difference. Chang Woo silently led her through the yard, showed her the smokehouses, 3 of them now, the warehouses, Sierra's greenhouses made of cow bladders stretched over a frame. Inside the greenhouses, greens and early vegetables. A mill on the stream, a small one with wooden millstones. Kim Dae built it. Sierra's distillation cube, the soap factory. A tar kiln, barrels of sauerkraut. Yes, cabbage. Chang Woo taught Han Mae how to make sauerkraut. At first, she thought it was animal feed. A month later, she was secretly stealing from the barrel at night. Emma looked at all this silently, professionally. She was calculating in her head. Then she turned to Chang Woo. She said he was sitting on a gold mine, and didn't even know it. Meat and soap were small potatoes. The real money was in Sierra's herbs, honey from the forest logs, and tar. The ducal cities paid triple for tar because their own tar kilns had burned down in last year's fire. She could sell it a lot, far away, Chang Woo thought. Emma waited. He agreed, but on one condition. He sets the prices himself, and no goods from Cedar Court are sold where they will be used for war. No tar for flaming arrows, no poisons, no weapons. Emma nodded. A fair deal. She left 3 days later. She returned 2 weeks later with a cart full of salt. Salt. For the first time in a year, there was salt in Cedar Court. When Han Mae saw the sacks, she hid in silence. Then she hugged the nearest sack, pressed her cheek against it. The salty burlap fabric smelled like home, like life before the exile. Like a normal life. Chang Woo watched. He walked over. He hugged her along with the sack. Han Mae laughed. For the first time in a year. A full genuine laugh. Yuri ran over. She said she wanted to hug the sack, too. She hugged it. Han Sol held in Nambi's arms blue bubbles and didn't understand why everyone was hugging the sack. Emma returned every 2 weeks. She brought things that couldn't be found in the forest. Salt, fabric, needles, thread, paper for Park Jong-min who taught the children, ink. She took away meat, and soap and tar and honey, and Sierra's herbal mixtures. Trade was booming. Money started coming in. Not much, but steadily. Chang Woo didn't save any. Everything went back to Cedar Court. Nails, tools, fabric, seeds. By the end of summer, Cedar Court had 50 residents, 6 houses, a smithy, a mill, 3 smokehouses, 2 greenhouses, a soap factory, a tar factory, a bakery. Park Jong-min School where 10 children were learning to read and write. Nambi brought wolves, 6, then 8, then 12. The wolf pack lived behind the stockade. They patrolled the borders. Nambi commanded them, not with words, with something of her own, a wolf's way. Gray was the leader. An old, lame, seasoned wolf with a torn ear. He lay on the porch of the main house and looked out at the yard like the master. Yuri fed him from her hand and commanded him to sit, and he sat because Yuri said so. In the fall, The first convoy from the Duke arrived. Not a military one, a trade one. 3 carts, a merchant. 2 guards. The merchant surveyed Cedar Court with wide eyes. He counted the houses. He counted the people. He sniffed Sierra's soap. He tasted the smoked meat. He felt the tar. He left in silence. A month later, he returned with an offer from Duke Cho. The Duke wants to buy meat and tar for his cities a lot, regularly at prices he sets himself. Chang Woo listened. He refused. He said he sets the prices and that they would be 3 times lower than the Duke's. But payment must be made in advance. The merchant left. After 2 weeks, he returned. The Duke had agreed. When Emma found out, she slapped her forehead. She said that Chang Woo had just undermined the Duke's monopoly with the Duke's own money. That by the time the Duke realized what had happened, it would be too late. Chang Woo nodded. He knew. Winter. The second winter. The long winter had struck again. Was minus over 40 degrees below zero. Blizzards raged for weeks. But it was warm in Cedar Court. The stoves were lit. The smokehouses were smoking. The greenhouses were working. Bread was baked every day. There was meat. There was salt. There was soap. There was firewood. The children were studying. The wolves were patrolling. Outside the walls, the world was freezing. People were dying in the Lee clan. Famine was setting in the ducal cities. But at Cedar Court, there was sauerkraut and smoked venison and fresh bread on the table. And Han Mae no longer stole cabbage from the barrel in secret. She ate openly, in front of everyone, with the dignity of a woman who had earned every bite, because she was the one who kept track of every grain and every piece of meat and every sack of salt. Without her, Cedar Court would have fallen apart within a month. Chang Woo knew this, and he said it out loud in front of everyone. Han Mae stands at this table. Han Mae counts. Han Mae decides. She blushed, but she held her back straight. The second winter brought 3 blows. The first blow, the Seo clan, they found out where So-ah was. One of the merchants let it slip, or the Duke's merchant reported it. A detachment arrived at the gates of Cedar Court. 15 warriors. Real ones, not starving peasants. With spears like those of the Lee clan, fighters in leather armor, with swords, with bows. Riding at the front was the eldest son of the Seo clan chief, Seo Jinho, 30 years old, So-ah's older brother. He stopped at the gate, demanded his sister's return, said he knew the woodcutter was holding her by force, said the Seo clan would declare a blood feud if So-ah wasn't returned by sunset. So-ah stood on the watchtower with a bow. That very asymmetrical bow, 30 arrows. She heard every word her brother said. Chang Woo stood at the gate, calm. Gray was beside him. Behind the stockade in the forest were 12 of Nami's wolves. On the rooftops, Kim Dae with a spear and 3 men who used to work for the clan. Chang Woo replied that So-ah was a free person, that she had come of her own accord, that she could leave whenever she wanted. He turned toward the watchtower. He looked at So-ah and told her in front of everyone that if she wanted to go back to her brother, he wouldn't stop her. That it was her decision and hers alone. Seo Jinho looked at his sister. So-ah looked at her brother. Then at Chang Woo. Then at the courtyard, at the house, at Yuri, who was standing on the porch holding Han Sol in her arms because Han Mae was at the bakery, at Nambai, who was sitting on the fence and growling quietly, at Sierra, who was standing in the doorway of her workshop with the rolling pin in her hand and the look of a woman ready to hit anyone who walked in uninvited over the head with that rolling pin. So-ah raised her bow. She didn't draw it. She just raised it so her brother could see, and she said she was home. Seo Jinho turned pale, then he flushed. He gripped the hilt of his sword. His 15 warriors fell into line. A wolf's howl rang out from the forest. 1, 2, 3, 12 voices from all sides. The 15 warriors of the Seo clan exchanged glances. They were the best fighters, but fighting in winter in a foreign forest against a pack of wolves they couldn't see. That wasn't a fight. It was suicide. So, Jinho stood there. He thought. Then he turned his horse around. He said this wasn't the end. He rode away. So up in the watchtower lowered her bow. Her hands were shaking. Not from fear. From the fact that she had just renounced her family out loud in front of witnesses forever. Yuri shouted from below that So-ah was a good girl. So-ah laughed. A strange laugh in which there was as much joy as there was pain. The second blow, mercenaries. A month after the Seo clan's visit. Strangers came in the night. Not the Lee clan, not the Seo clan, mercenaries. 10 men sent by who knows whom. Most likely the Duke, who had finally been informed that the forest settlement was undermining his trade monopoly. They came quietly at night. They bypassed the traps. They walked past the signal cords, professionals, but they didn't know the forest. The forest saw them. The forest saw everyone who entered the circle's boundaries, and the forest wouldn't let them in. Not with walls, not with magic, with trails. The trails led them astray. Those heading south found themselves in the north. Those heading for the stockade found themselves by the stream. For 2 days, the mercenaries wandered through the forest half a kilometer from Cedar Court and could not find their way. On the 3rd day, they gave up. They emerged onto the southern trail unarmed. The forest had taken their weapons. Not in any mystical way. The branches simply caught on their scabbards. The roots grabbed their legs. The swords fell into the snow, and the snow buried them in seconds. By the morning of the 3rd day, 10 healthy men stood on the trail unarmed, without food, without direction, and with expressions of quiet horror on their faces. They headed south. They never returned. A rumor spread through the villages. Villagers began saying the forest prince could not be touched because the forest itself protected him. It was not a rumor. It was the truth. The 3rd blow was silent. Chang Woo came to the stone circle alone at night. The forest called, not with words, with a sensation, heavy, oppressive, like a migraine that won't go away. He walked along the path, and the trees parted before him. In the clearing stood a circle. 8 stones. Moonlight lay upon them like silver. In the center of the circle, the earth trembled slightly. Barely noticeable, but it trembled. Chang Woo stepped inside. He lay down on the ground. He closed his eyes. Soon he came to him. Not as a ghost. As a memory, like a dream within a dream, she stood before him, young, beautiful, sad. She told him. Not with words, with images. She showed him that she wasn't the only one beneath the stones. That the Duke's shamans hadn't sealed away only the mistress. They had sealed the heart of the forest, the living power of the black taiga. For 300 years, the forest had lived at half of its strength. For 300 years, the trees grew half as fast. For 300 years, there were half as many animals. For 300 years, the winters were twice as harsh. A long winter, not once in 100 years. It shouldn't exist at all. This is the consequence of the seal. The forest is freezing because its heart is frozen. If the seal isn't broken, it will get worse, colder every year, hungrier every year. In 10 years, the black taiga will die, and with it everything that lives within its borders will die. Chang Woo asked how to remove the seal. Sunny showed him. He must go around each of the 8 stones, place a hand on them, and give up a part of his connection to the forest. Not all of it, but a lot. 8 stones. 8 parts of the gift. After that, he would remain the master of the thicket, but a weak one. The gift of growth would be lost for years. The double return would weaken. His reading of the thicket would grow dim. He would be almost an ordinary man for 5 years, maybe longer. But the forest would recover, its heart would beat, and normal winters would finally return. Sunny would also be freed after 300 years. Chang Woo lay on frozen ground and considered 5 years without power. 5 years as an ordinary man with an axe seemed survivable beside a blacksmith, huntress, healer, merchant, half-wolf guardian, and brilliant wife. Healer and a merchant and a half-wolf with a wolf guard and a wife who keeps the best accounts. In the northern ridge, he smiled, he stood up. He walked over to the first stone, he placed his hand on it. Chang Woo entered the stone circle alone, knowing every broken seal would strip away another part of the forest gift. Sunny had shown him the cost clearly. Lose his power for years, or let the entire black taiga freeze to death. With Cedar Court and his family depending on that forest, he placed his palm against the first ancient stone. The cost of his gift. He walked around the stones all night. The first stone took away the forest voice. The world grew quieter. The forest, which a second ago had sounded like an orchestra, fell silent. Every tree, every bush, every stone had spoken to him continuously since that first day when he walked around the area in a circle. Now there was silence. Chang Woo felt an emptiness, not in his chest but somewhere deeper inside, as if someone had blown out the candle in the room where he was used to seeing. He stood by the first stone, ran his fingers over the moss, cold, dead. Before, the moss would have told him how old it was, what had grown here before it, and who had passed by yesterday. Now the moss was just moss. The second stone took away the beast respect. That hurt more. Somewhere in the forest, wolves raised their heads. Gray stood by the stockade and whined, long and drawn out, melancholy, as if he had lost his master. Nambai woke up in the house. She pressed her ears back against her head. Her tail curled between her legs. She sensed that the thread connecting Chang Woo to the forest was growing thin. She ran out onto the porch. Gray stood with his muzzle facing north and howled quietly. Not at the moon, at the ground. Nambai placed her hand on his withers. His fur stood on end. The third stone had taken the earth's memory. Chang Woo touched the tree next to the circle, an old cedar. He remembered this cedar. He had touched it dozens of times. Each time, the cedar told him who had slept beneath its roots, whose blood had soaked into the earth, whose hands had touched the bark before him. Now nothing. The bark was just bark, rough, cold, silent. Chang Woo withdrew his hand. He stood there for a moment. He walked to the fourth stone. The fourth took away the gift of growth. On the southern slope near Cedar Court, 3 cedars trembled. They did not fall, they did not wither. They simply stopped growing, froze. Like a clock whose spring had run out. Han Mae was asleep and didn't see it, but in the morning, she would notice that the cedars were no longer reaching for the sky, and she would be frightened, and she would be right. The 5th and 6th took the double return, all of it, down to the last drop. Chang Woo stood by the 6th stone, breathing heavily. His legs buckled. His hands trembled as if his blood were being drained from him. It didn't hurt, but it felt empty. Each stone took a part of what made him the master of the thicket and gave it back to the earth beneath the circle. The earth hummed low, deep. The trembling grew stronger. The stones vibrated beneath his palms. The moss on them crumbled. The lichen cracked. Ancient symbols emerged ever more clearly. The 7th stone. Chang Woo almost fell. He was walking toward it, but his legs wouldn't hold him. He dropped to his knees. He crawled the last 3 meters. He placed his hand on the stone. It took the last crumbs of his connection. He became ordinary, completely. A man with calloused hands and an axe. At his belt, without magic, without a gift, without the voice of the forest in his head. The silence was deafening. He knelt in the snow and listened to that silence. A year and 3 months. That was how long he had been the master of the thicket, and every second of that time, the forest had spoken to him, prompted him, guided him, gave to him. Now silence, as if he had gone deaf, as if he had gone blind, as if they had cut off a part of his body he didn't know he had until it was gone. The 8th remained, the largest, the oldest. He stood at the center of the circle's northern arc, a head taller than the rest, 1.5 times wider. Carved symbols were visible beneath the moss on its surface, ancient. 300 years ago, 3 shamans drove these stones into the ground. 300 years ago, they sealed the living woman beneath the roots of the taiga. For 300 years, the heart of the forest had been beating at half strength. He couldn't read the symbols. He might have been able to before. The earth's memory would have told him. Not now. Now he simply saw furrows in the stone, smooth, deep, carved not by a tool, but by something else. Chang Woo rose to his feet slowly, holding onto the 6th stone. Then he let go. He stood alone on his own feet, without help. He approached the 8th. 1 step, another, a third. Each felt as if he were walking through water. His body was heavy, empty, like a sack from which all the contents had been poured out. He placed his hand on the last stone. The stone was icy, then hot, then the stone was gone. Light, white, warm, like the sun in June, like noon in a clearing by the river, like the light a person sees when they close their eyes and turn their face toward the sun. It flooded the clearing, flooded the forest, flooded the sky from horizon to horizon. The black taiga flashed white for a second. The earth trembled once, deeply, with its whole body, like a sigh, like the first breath after a long, long sleep. The stones split, all 8 of them at the same time. Cracks ran from the base to the tops, slowly, with a crunch. Like ice on a river in spring. The stones broke into pieces. They crumbled, not into dust, into moss, into the earth, into the grass that suddenly sprouted from under the snow in the middle of winter. Green, bright, alive. Grass in January. Steam rose from the center of the circle, thick, warm, moist, smelling of earth. After rain, smelling of pine needles, smelling of something floral. Something that couldn't be here in winter. Couldn't be, and yet it was. The steam dissipated. In place of the circle was a clearing, flat, green, 30 meters across. Grass up to the ankles, soft, warm. The snow around the clearing was melting before his eyes, receding. The earth was breathing. Literally, Chang Woo could feel it rising and falling beneath his feet, slowly, rhythmically, a heartbeat. The heart of the black taiga was beating for the first time in 300 years, and standing in the middle of the clearing was a woman, tall with long black hair down to her waist, young, beautiful, ethereal, sunny, mistress of the thicket, the one who built the first house in this forest, the one who took in the first exiles, the one who fought the 3 duchies and lost, the one who was buried alive for 300 years. She stood barefoot on the green grass and looked at Chang Woo. He looked at her. She was just as he had seen her in his visions, tall, strong, with a straight back and calm eyes. But her eyes were different. Not sad, not ancient, bright, free. She smiled. The The first smile in 300 years, subtle, quiet, like dawn over the taiga. Then she approached, one step, another, a third. Each step left a light trail on the grasses of her feet were touching water, not earth. She stopped before him, raised her hand, reached out, touched his forehead. Her fingers were cold, like morning snow, like the first ice on a puddle in October. She said nothing, but he felt it, everything at once. Gratitude for coming, for not being afraid, for giving the gift willingly, for building what she hadn't had time to finish. Sadness for 300 years in the dark, for the people she hadn't saved, for the forest that froze without her. Joy, for the grass beneath his feet, for the sky above his head, for freedom, and a request, just one, not in words, in an image. She showed him cedar court from above, as a bird sees it, a small village in a vast forest, smoke from chimneys, people, children, wolves, and light, warm, even, coming from every house, from every person. She showed him that this was what it was all for, not a principality, not a fortress, not power, home, a place where people come, a place where they don't die of the cold, a place where there's always a full mug on the table. She withdrew her hand. Chang Woo stood there, his throat tightened, his eyes stung. He wasn't crying, but he was close. Soon he turned around. She walked to the edge of the clearing, one step, another, a third. With every step, she became more transparent. Light passed through her as if through morning mist. A fourth, a fifth. Her feet dissolved, became part of the grass, then her body, then her shoulders, then her hair, long, black. It fluttered even though there was no wind. Her face was the last to disappear. A smile. She dissolved into the air, became light, became warmth, became part of the forest that had kept her safe, and that she had kept safe. Soon he was gone. 300 years of waiting, one night of liberation and freedom. Chang Woo stood in a green clearing in the middle of the winter forest, alone in silence. The forest did not speak to him. The gift was silent, but the forest breathed deeply, evenly, strongly, like a living creature that had awakened after a long illness and was taking its first real breath. Chang Woo quietly said, he quietly offered his gratitude to her, to the forest, to the world. Then he sat down on the grass. Then he lay down. The grass was warm and soft, like a feather bed. He closed his eyes. His body ached, empty, drained, but calm. He had done what needed to be done. He had done the right thing. He fell asleep. He woke up to a voice. Han Mae. She was standing over him, pale, with tear-stained eyes. Her hair was disheveled. Her scarf was askew. She had been running. So I was nearby, a bow on her back, her face tense. Nambai, ears pinned back, eyes wet, gray. Standing nearby, head bowed. They had been searching for him all night and all morning. Nambai led them there by scent. Without Chang Woo's gift, the forest wouldn't have led them to him. They had to search like animals. Han Mae saw a green clearing in the middle of winter. She saw crumbled stones. She saw her husband lying on the grass with his eyes closed. She feared the worst. She rushed to him, fell to her knees, grabbed him by the shoulders, shook him, called out to him. Her voice broke, but he opened his eyes. He saw her face, wet with tears, beautiful, frightened, familiar. He smiled, said everything was fine, that it was cold, sitting on the grass, that he wanted some tea. Han Mae hit him on the shoulder, hard. Then she hugged him, tightly, so hard his ribs cracked. Then she hit him again. Then she hugged him again. She was crying and cursing at the same time. She said he was crazy, that he'd left in the middle of the night, that he hadn't told anyone, that she thought that she didn't finish. She buried her face in his chest. Chang Woo stroked her head silently. She was right. He should have told her, should have warned her. But he couldn't, because if he had, Han Mae wouldn't have let him go. She would have stood in the doorway, hands on her hips, eyes like a she-wolf, and he wouldn't have left. And the forest would have continued to die. So I stood nearby and looked out at the clearing, at the grass, at the patches of bare ground around them, at the sky, which had grown higher and brighter. She felt that the air had changed, warmer, softer, lighter, as if someone had opened a window in a stuffy room, as if someone had lifted the lid off a pot and let the steam escape. She didn't know what had happened, but she knew that the world around her had become different. She quietly asked what he had done. Chang Woo replied that he had let go of the one he was waiting. So I didn't understand, but she nodded. She was used to not understanding everything Chang Woo did, and she was used to his actions ultimately turning out to be right. Nambai sat at the edge of the clearing, her knees pulled up to her chest, her tail was wrapped around her legs, her ears were pricked. She could hear the forest, all of it, in its entirety. For the First time in her life. She was half-wolf. She had always sensed the taiga better than humans. But it had been like hearing music through a wall, muffled and distinct, individual sounds but no melody. Now the wall had crumbled. The forest sounded at full force. Every tree, every bush, every stone, every beast, all together. One voice. Huge, ancient, alive. She cried quietly at the beauty of this sound, at the fact that it had always been there and she hadn't heard it, at the fact that now she could hear it. Grace sat next to her. He didn't howl. He didn't whine. He just sat there. An old wolf with a torn ear and a lame paw. He heard it, too. And he was silent, too, because words are superfluous in the face of such music. They returned to Cedar Court in the morning. They walked slowly. Chang Woo could barely stay on his feet. Han Mae walked beside him, holding his hand, not letting go. So I walked ahead. Bow at the ready, out of habit. Nambai brought up the rear. Gray was by her side. The whole village was out. 50 people. Everyone had come out. Everyone was waiting. Sierra stood at the gate, arms crossed, a fierce look on her face. She hadn't slept all night. She'd been brewing a restorative potion, just in case. When she saw Chang Woo, she shoved a mug into his hands, told him to drink. He drank. Bitter, disgusting. But it warmed him from the inside. Emma stood next to Sierra, biting her lip. When she saw that Chang Woo was walking on his own, she exhaled. She said he looked like a man who'd been run over by a cart. Chang Woo smirked. He replied that that was pretty much the case. Kim Dae stood by the forge, silent, a hammer in his hand, as if he were about to start forging. In reality, he was just holding it, because when the old blacksmith is anxious, he picks up the hammer. It makes him feel calmer. Park Jong-min stood with the children. 10 children, clean, dressed, well-fed. They stared with wide eyes. They didn't understand what was happening, but they sensed that something important was going on. Park soon stood by the bakery, fresh bread in her arms. She'd been baking since dawn, because when she's anxious, she bakes. That's her way. Chang Woo walked through the gate. Yuri rushed toward him, a little bundle of energy with pigtails. She threw herself at his legs, clung to him. He lifted her into his arms. She wrapped her arms around his neck, squeezed so tight he gasped. Then she pulled back, looked him in the face with serious brown eyes, said she'd been worried sternly, like an adult, like the little woman she would one day become. Chang Woo kissed her on the forehead. He said he wouldn't leave without warning anymore. Yuri nodded. She accepted his promise. Han Sol held in Park Soon's arms, blew bubbles, and reached out his hands toward his father. 9 months old, chubby, pink, with black hair sticking out in all directions. Chang Woo took him with his other hand. His son clung to his shirt. The shirt crinkled, strong. Chang Woo stood with 2 children in his arms at the gate of his house, and looked at the people around him. 50 people. Their eyes carried the same relief. He had returned, and although the gift was gone, the work, people, and home remained. And in each one's eyes was the same thing. Their eyes carried the same relief. He had returned, and although the gift was gone, the work, people, and home remained. Spring came early that year. 3 weeks earlier than usual, the snow melted quickly. The streams began to ring. They broke through the ice and raced over the rocks. The birds returned in flocks, noisy, bold, joyful. The black taiga turned green in early April, for the first time in 300 years. The cedars stood in young needles. The birches had sprouted catkins. The fir smelled of resin so strongly that everyone grew dizzy. Villagers across the northern regions stared in disbelief, while elders admitted no remembered spring had ever arrived this early. That no one had remembered it, because there hadn't been a spring like this in 300 years. Cedar Court greeted spring with work. They plowed, they sowed, they built, without magic, without sorcery, with their hands, with axes, with sweat and calluses. Chang Woo worked harder than anyone, just like on the first day, just like Ivan Sokolov on that plot of land near Archangelsk 20 years ago. He chopped, he hewed, he dug, he built. An ordinary man with an axe. A body that a year ago could barely hold an axe was now sturdy, muscular, strong. Not for magic, for work, from food, from life. By midsummer, Cedar Court had grown to 100 people, then to 120, 6 hamlets on the territory. Fox Farm, Blacksmith Farm, Wolf Farm where the beastmen lived, Sierra's Grass Farm, South Farm by the greenhouses, East Farm at the logging site. To treaties with beastmen packs, the northern Greys came first, the Nambai tribe, the very ones who had banished her. For her weakness, they came because winter had hit them just as hard as it had the humans, and because Nambai stood at the gate, and told her former kin that here they don't. Her former kin that cedar court never punish mercy. The horned ones came next. Gentle half-deer people with branched antlers and cautious eyes. They traded fur and mushrooms for grain and salt, peacefully, calmly. For the first time in generations, trade with the 10 villages ran like clockwork. Emma went every 2 weeks. She brought things. She took things away, she bargained, smiled, schemed, did what she did best. One day Chang Woo saw her counting coins on the table, quickly, deftly, her fingers flying and a satisfied look on her face like a cat that had caught a mouse. He approached, placed a travel chest in front of her. Small, lightweight, with a false bottom with initials burned into the lid. The initials of Emma Carter. He made it in 3 evenings from ashwood. Ash is light, durable, water-resistant. Just what a merchant who's always on the road needs. A double bottom for documents and small valuables. Brass. Corners by Kim Dae. A leather handle. And the initials. Emma looked at the trunk and at Chang Woo. Then at the initials. He said that now she had a home to which this trunk would always return. Emma opened her mouth, closed it, opened it. For the first time in 24 years, Emma Carter, descendant of sailors and a wandering merchant, didn't know how to respond with a joke. She took the trunk, pressed it to her chest. She turned away quickly. She went out. Chang Woo heard her blow her nose behind the door, loudly, angrily, like someone who doesn't want to admit they're crying. The wolf guard, the school, Sierra's medicine house, the bakery, the mill, the blacksmith shop, 3 greenhouses, everything was working. Everything was alive, every day. Park Jong-min taught the children to read and write, every day. Kim Dae foraged, every day. Sierra made soap and medicine, every day. So I patrolled the perimeter with a bow and 3 arrows, accompanied by the young men she had trained, every day. Nambai went into the forest with the wolves and returned with game, every day. Han Mae sat at the ashwood table that Chang Woo had made for her in the very first month and did her calculations. She wrote things down. She planned. Without her, Cedar Court would have fallen apart in a week. Everyone knew this. She knew this. And she kept her back straight. In the fall, an old man came to the gate, alone, on foot, unarmed in a tattered sheepskin coat, with a stick instead of a staff. Lee Dok-soo, the former elder of the Lee clan, former. The clan had ousted him for failure, for famine, for 6 deaths the first winter, and for the second, for selling salt to the Duke, for driving out the only man who could have saved the clan. His own clan had driven him out in winter, just as he, Chang Woo, had once expelled him. The old man stood at the gate, gaunt, hunchbacked, old, his eyes dull, his hands hung limply at his sides. He asked for nothing. He said nothing. He simply stood there, like a tree that had forgotten why it grows. Chang Woo stepped out. He stood facing him. 2 men, one young, strong, with calluses on his hands and wood shavings in his hair. The other old, broken, with empty eyes. Chang Woo looked at the man who had sentenced him and his family to death in the winter forest. He looked and remembered that day. The cold, a sled with a cracked runner. Han Mae with her baby bump. Yuri with frostbitten cheeks. The elder's words, rebel, banish. Unanimous. He remembered everything, and he stood and watched. Lee Dok-soo didn't look up. He waited for the verdict, for refusal, for a blow, for anything. Chang Woo opened the gate wider, so that the old man could pass without squeezing through. He said there was only one rule. Whoever came worked. Whoever worked ate. Lee Dok-soo looked up. There was something broken in his eyes. Something that would never be fixed. But through that brokenness, something else shone through. Not gratitude, not relief. Understanding. He understood who stood before him. Not a rebel. Not a woodcutter. Not a forest prince. A man who does the right things even when he doesn't want to. Yes, even when it hurts. Even when standing before him is the one who sent him to die. The old man stepped through the gate. Han Mae stood on the porch. She saw. She remembered. She remembered this man's voice. She remembered the cold of that morning. She remembered Yuri's cough. She remembered her stomach, and her fear, and her certainty that they would all die. She stood and watched as the old man walked across the yard, slowly, heavily, like a man carrying a burden heavier than himself. She clenched her teeth. Then she unclenched them. She went into the house, brought out a mug of hot soup, approached the old man, held it out. Lee Dok-soo looked at her, at the mug, at her hands, which a year ago had trembled with cold on a sled with a cracked runner. He took it. His hands were shaking. He drank, and tears streamed down his wrinkled cheeks and dripped into the soup. Yuri stood nearby, 5 years old, serious, thoughtful. She looked at the old man, then at her father, then back at the old man. She said the soup was hot and he should blow on it, or he'd burn himself. Lee Doksu blew on the soup obediently like a child. The winter of the third year began gently, noticeably warmer than the previous ones. 20 below instead of 40 below. The snow fell evenly, not in drifts. The rivers froze a month later than usual. The long winter was retreating. The forest breathed. The black taiga was waking from a 300-year slumber. The animals returned: deer, moose, bears. Even the fish in the streams had grown in number. By late autumn, a convoy had pulled up to the gates of Cedar Court, 20 wagons, guards in traveling cloaks, and a man at the front, short, thin, in a plain cloak without coats of arms, but his posture was straight, and he had the eyes of a man accustomed to having others obey him. Duke Cho, Lord of the Northern Ridge, overlord of 3 provinces. He did not arrive with an army, nor with a demand. He arrived with empty wagons because there is a bread riot in the capital. The foragers he sent out to the villages turned out to be thieves. The granaries are empty. The treasury is empty. The people are starving. And the only place where there is grain and meat and order is a forest settlement in the Black Taiga, to which he himself sent mercenaries 3 months ago. Duke Cho stood by the wooden gate. He took off his hat, not because he wanted to, because he had to. He looked at the palisade, at the houses, at the people, at the wolves, at the half-wolf fawn, the fence, at the woman with the bow on the watchtower, at the children running through the yard, at the smoke from the chimneys, at the cedars by the entrance. He had expected to see a warrior, or sorcerer, or rebel with an army, but he saw a settlement, alive, working, well-fed, warm, and a man in a work shirt with an axe at his belt and with shaving's hair. Chang Woo walked out through the gate calmly, without haste. Behind him stood Cedar Court, Han Mae with Han Sol in her arms, back straight, eyes calm. The woman who keeps track of every grain in the principality, and knows the value of every piece of bread. Yuri, 5 years old, with pigtails, with a serious face, with a wooden mug in her hand because she was drinking milk when the convoy arrived, with an asymmetrical bow on her shoulder, with a straight back and the cold eyes of a hunter who can take down a bird in flight. Nambai, next to her, gray, next to gray for more wolves, quiet, calm, staring at the Duke's guards so that the guards tried not to move. Sira, with her arms crossed and an expression that spoke louder than words about what she thinks of people. Yi, who show up uninvited. Emma, with a smile, who is already calculating the value of the future deal. Kim Dae, with a hammer in his hand, a habit. Park Jong-min, with a book under his arm. Park Soon, with children. Lee Dok-soo, standing in the back row, silent, eyes cast down, and 120 people behind them. Men, women, children, old people. Beastmen, people the world had cast aside, and Chang Woo had picked up. The Duke looked at him. Chang Woo nodded, so there was grain. Let's go inside and talk. He has a bathhouse heating up. The steam is good. The Duke blinked. His entourage exchanged glances. One of the guards opened. His mouth closed, it couldn't find the words. Emma bit her lip to keep from laughing. Yuri giggled. Han Sol, in his mother's arms, blew a bubble, and Chang Woo led the Duke of the Northern Ridge across the courtyard, past the smithy, the bakery, past the greenhouses, past the wolves, past the children, past the barrels of sauerkraut, into the bathhouse. Because serious matters are settled over steam and hot tea, not with swords and threats, because that's the right way. Because he doesn't know any other way. The Duke emerged from the bathhouse 2 hours later, red, steamed, with a birch broom in his hand, which he had taken with him for some reason, with an agreement in his mind, an honest one, an equal one, grain and meat for the capital in exchange for the recognition of the Cedar Court official with a charter with a seal. Tax-free for 5 years, no requisitioneers, no mercenaries, no threats. The Duke left with full carts, the agreement and the birch broom, and at the threshold he turned around. He looked at Chang Woo. He said quietly that he had expected a warrior or a sorcerer, but a man with calloused hands had come, and for some reason, more terrifying than any sorcerer. Chang Woo replied that he wasn't terrifying. He just prepared for winter better than anyone else. The Duke snorted. He left. In the evening, Chang Woo sat on the porch, alone. The wagon train had gone. The dust had settled. The Cedar Court was growing quiet. Han Mae had put the children to bed. Yuri was asleep, hugging the wooden horse made of linden wood that her father had carved for her in her first month. Worn, licked, with a bitten-off ear, beloved, Han Sol was snoring in his cedar cradle, with 3 cedars on the back. The very same 3 cedars that grew by the entrance that he had planted that first winter, that had frozen when he made his offering, that had begun to grow again, slowly, but growing. So I was peeling onions on the porch of the neighboring house. Her movements were familiar, calm. Her left shoulder didn't hurt. It hadn't hurt for a year. Now, and it wouldn't. Nambai was lying on the roof next to Gray looking at the stars. Her ears were perked up. Her tail hung off the eaves. Gray rested his head on. Her back, old, gray-haired, with a torn ear, but alive, warm, loyal. Sierra was in the workshop making something that smelled of lavender. Soap, her own soap. Using her own recipe, for herself and for everyone. Because in this bear-infested corner, someone has to make sure people don't smell like bears. Emma sat at the table by candlelight and wrote letters. Next to her was a chest with initials. The home to which the chest always returns. Kim Dae snored on a bench in the smithy. A hammer within reach, a habit. Park Jong-min read to the children before bed. His voice was quiet, steady, lulling. Lee Doxy sat by the stove in the communal house, quiet, hunchbacked, but alive. Cedar Court lived, breathed, fell asleep. 120 people under the roofs. That Chang Woo had built with his own hands. Not all of them, of course. Many were built by others. But the first roof, that very one, made of spruce branches and snow and a Venki chum with a clay chimney. He built that first roof alone in 3 hours at -30 for his pregnant wife and his coughing daughter. That's how Cedar Court began. The forest stayed silent, and the gift might return in 1 year, 5 years, or never. But Chang Woo accepted every possibility. It might return in 1 year, in 5, or perhaps never. He didn't know. But the forest was breathing deeply, steadily, strongly. The heart of the black taiga was beating at full strength. Winters will grow milder. Summer will grow longer. Trees will grow. Beasts will come. Children will grow up. Yuri would grow up and become the kind of woman who could make wolves sit on. Han's soul would grow strong enough to continue the work, and their future would be difficult, imperfect, and still deeply good. He looked at his hands, calloused, chapped, covered in scrapes, splinters, and burns from the stove. Hands that built a house from nothing. Hands that delivered a child. Hands that healed a wolf and forged a bow and carved a cradle. Hands that opened the gate to a man who came to kill them. The hands of a master. The hands of a forester. The hands of a man who. He offered quiet gratitude to everything, especially the drowning puppy whose rescue had ended one life and opened another. He thanked Han Mae for believing when belief seemed impossible, and Yuri for breaking 3 days of terror with one delighted word. He thanked Han's soul, Soa, Nambai, Sierra, Emma, Kim Dae, and every outcast who chose to stay. The forest answered without words, stirring the entrance cedars with a soft wind that moved like a familiar hand. Entrance quietly, gently. 3 cedars, his cedars. He planted them that first winter. Thin twigs up to his waist. Now they were taller than the house, thick, strong, with dense dark needles. They were growing. Again, slowly, like ordinary trees, without magic, without a gift. They were simply growing because they had been planted by the right hands in the right soil, for the right people, and that was enough.